Hey guys, tonight we're going to peel back the layers of time to uncover something both deeply familiar and wildly alien. The pursuit of love. Imagine, for a moment, you're not in your comfortable bed, but standing on a bustling street corner, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and roasting meat. You're trying to catch the eye of someone special, but there are no apps to swipe, no witty bios to read. Your success depends on your poetry, your family's reputation, and maybe, just maybe, the magical properties of a gladiator's sweat. It's a world where a single misstep, a misplaced compliment, or even just bad breath could not only ruin your chances, but mark you for public ridicule for the rest of your days. You probably wouldn't survive this, at least not with your ego intact. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. I always love to see where you're all listening from, so feel free to post your location and local time in the comments below. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The stones beneath your sandals are cool and uneven, worn smooth by centuries of footsteps, carts, and marching legions. You're in Rome, the heart of a sprawling empire, and as dusk settles, the city doesn't sleep. It transforms. Torches and oil lamps cast long, dancing shadows down narrow alleyways. The din of the daytime forum, with its politicians and merchants, gives way to a different kind of energy. From open-air taverns, you hear the clatter of dice and boisterous laughter. The scent of baking bread from a neighbourhood pistrinum mingles with the less pleasant aroma of the city's open drains, and the heavy incense wafting from a nearby temple. This is your dating scene. This is your arena. You see someone across the way, a person whose smile catches the flickering lamplight just so. You want to approach, to offer a clever line, but you pause for a crucial, self-conscious check. You discreetly breathe into your cupped hand. Is your breath fresh? In ancient Rome, this isn't a minor detail, it's a deal-breaker of epic proportions. The poets of the age, men like Catullus and Martial, were vicious in their takedowns of those with poor oral hygiene. They wrote scathing verses about acquaintances whose breath could wilt flowers or sour wine, ensuring their social humiliation would be remembered for posterity. To combat this, you might have chewed on fragrant leaves or aniseed. For a deeper clean, you'd use a powder made from crushed bones, eggshells, or even oyster shells, scrubbing your teeth with your finger or a specially frayed stick. Forget forgetting to text back. Showing up with bad breath was the ultimate sign of disrespect. Now, let's say your breath is minty fresh, or at least as fresh as crushed bone powder can make it. You need something else, an edge, something that says you're not just another face in the crowd. You need to radiate power, vitality, and a hint of danger. And for the Roman woman looking to enhance her allure, the go-to cosmetic wasn't a designer perfume. It was something far more visceral. It was called gluo, and it was, to put it delicately, the sweat and grime scraped from a victorious gladiator. Picture the scene at the Colosseum. The sand is soaked with water and something more sinister. A champion gladiator, his body gleaming with sweat and oil, stands victorious. Before he heads to the baths, attendants armed with curved metal tools called strigils carefully scrape this potent mixture from his skin. This byproduct, a cocktail of sweat, dirt, and olive oil, was considered a powerful aphrodisiac. It was bottled and sold at a premium to the women of Rome, who would mix a small amount into their face creams or perfumes. The thinking was that it contained the gladiator's virtues, his raw masculine energy and courage. By wearing it, a woman could supposedly capture some of that intoxicating power and become irresistible. It's like a celebrity fragrance, only the celebrity might have just fatally dispatched 3 guys and a lion. Good luck explaining that one at the family dinner. Of course, underneath all this strange and sometimes desperate pageantry of attraction, lay a much more pragmatic reality. A mainstream historical fact of the era is that for the Roman upper classes, marriage was rarely about love or personal choice. It was a contract, a business alliance. The paterfamilias, the male head of the household, held absolute authority and would arrange his children's marriages to secure wealth, forge political ties, or consolidate family power. A girl could be betrothed as young as 12, with her own feelings being largely irrelevant to the transaction. This creates a fascinating tension that historians still wrestle with. We have the deeply passionate, sometimes heartbreakingly beautiful love poetry of figures like Ovid and Catullus, which speaks of stolen glances, secret meetings, and overwhelming desire. And yet, we have the rigid social structure of arranged marriages. So historians still argue whether the romantic love depicted in this poetry was a widespread cultural reality for ordinary people, or if it was simply a literary trope, an escapist fantasy enjoyed by a small, educated elite who were trapped in loveless unions. Were these genuine outpourings of the heart, or was it all just a sophisticated game? As you stand on that Roman street, contemplating your next move, you realise that the search for connection has always been a complex dance between raw human emotion and the unwritten rules of the world you live in. Your world just happens to have much stranger rules than most. The air grows cooler. You decide against approaching the stranger, feeling the weight of unspoken rules pressing down on you. It's all too complicated. If only there were a guide, a manual for navigating these treacherous social waters, and as if the universe heard you, you remember the talk of the town, a scandalous and wildly popular work by a poet named Publius Ovidius Naso, or Ovid for short. He's the man who literally wrote the book on love, or, more accurately, on the art of seduction. It's called Ars Amatoria, the art of love, and getting your hands on a copy is both a thrill and a risk. This isn't a respectable philosophical text. It's a practical step-by-step guide to winning a lover, and it's about as subtle as a charging rhinoceros. You find yourself at a dinner party a few nights later, reclining on a cushioned couch, a cup of watered-down wine in your hand. The target of your affection is just a few feet away, engaged in conversation. Now is the time to put Ovid's wisdom to the test. First, Ovid advises, you must find a way to get closer. He suggests a number of ploys. You could accidentally knock over your wine cup in her direction, forcing an interaction as you both fuss with the spilled liquid on the fine linen, or you could simply, inch by inch, scoot your couch closer to hers. You try this, a slow, almost imperceptible slide, hoping no one notices your clumsy advance. So far, so good. You're now close enough to catch the scent of her perfume, a mix of rose oil and something spicy, maybe cinnamon. Next up on the Ovidian checklist, conversation. Don't be a bore. Don't talk about pending legislation or the price of grain. Ask about her passions. Ovid suggests the chariot races. Who do you favour, you might whisper, the Greens or the Blues? It's the Roman equivalent of asking about a favourite sports team, a guaranteed way to elicit an opinion. You must listen intently, agree with her choice, and curse the name of the rival charioteer. The goal is to create an instant shared camaraderie. The dinner winds down, and someone brings out a board game. Perhaps it's La Trinculi, a game of military strategy, or Ludus Duodecim Scriptorum, the game of 12 lines, an ancestor of backgammon. This, according to Ovid, is your golden opportunity. As the dice are passed and smooth glass or stone pieces are moved across the board, he gives you some truly devious advice. Cheat. Not to win. That would be boorish. No, you should cheat in a way that helps her. Let her take back a bad move. Accidentally misread the dice in her favour, and most importantly, use the game as an excuse for physical contact. As she contemplates her next move, you can lean in close, pointing to a space on the board, your fingers gently brushing against hers. Perhaps this is a better strategy, you say, your voice low. The fleeting touch sends a jolt through you both, a tiny spark of electricity in the lamplit room. It's calculated, manipulative, and, if you're being honest with yourself, strangely effective. It's the original let me show you how to hold the golf club move, just with more togas and less plaid. But Ovid's most theatrical piece of advice is yet to come. He insists that a man must show sensitivity, and the best way to do that is to learn how to cry on cue. Yes, fake tears. If the conversation turns to a sad play or a lost pet, you should be able to summon a single glistening tear. It shows you have a tender heart beneath your stoic Roman exterior. You haven't practiced this, and the idea of trying to squeeze out a tear without looking like you've just gotten dust in your eye feels absurd. You imagine trying to conjure a sad thought, the ending of a tragedy by Seneca maybe, and ending up with a contorted, pained expression that's more comical than sympathetic. A true master, Ovid implies, can turn on the waterworks as easily as pouring another glass of wine. It's this kind of advice that made Ovid a superstar but also an enemy of the state. It's a well-known historical fact that Emperor Augustus, who was on a crusade to restore traditional Roman morality and strengthen the institution of marriage through a series of laws, was not a fan. He saw Ovid's Ars Amatoria as a direct affront to his policies, a guide to the very adultery and promiscuity he was trying to stamp out. While the exact reasons for Ovid's eventual banishment to the bleak shores of the Black Sea are complex, his corrupting poetry was certainly a major factor. He taught a generation how to flirt, and the most powerful man in the world was not amused. However, a quirky and less discussed tidbit about Ovid is that he also wrote the sequel for When Things Go Wrong, Remedia Amoris, or The Cures for Love. This was his guide for the broken-hearted, a manual on how to fall out of love. His advice here is just as pragmatic. He tells the lovelorn to avoid places that remind them of their ex, to focus on their former lover's flaws, that annoying laugh, their terrible taste in pottery, and, if all else fails, to find a new flame immediately. It's a surprisingly modern take on the get back out there philosophy. The very nature of Ovid's work is a source of endless fascination. Historians still argue whether Ovid's work was intended as a genuine practical guide to seduction, or as a sophisticated satirical parody of Roman high society and elegiac poetry. Was he earnestly telling you to cheat at board games and fake your emotions? Or was he holding up a mirror to the absurd performative lengths that people would go to for the sake of desire, all with a sly wink? As you sit there at the dinner party, your hand still tingling from that brief touch, you don't really care. You're just grateful for the tips, however questionable they might be. The game continues, and you let her win, just as the master advised. The evening was a success. The carefully orchestrated brush of fingers, the feigned interest in the Blue Chariot team, it worked. You've secured an invitation to meet again, this time in a sun-dappled garden. But now the pressure is on. You need to look your best. For a man, this is relatively simple. A clean toga, hair neatly oiled, perhaps a touch of perfume. But for a Roman woman, achieving the ideal of beauty is a far more elaborate and frankly hazardous affair. As you prepare, you begin to understand that the quest for love is also a quest for an idealized physical form, one that requires a bathroom cabinet filled with some of the most dangerous cosmetics known to history. Your first step is the complexion. The look everyone craves is a smooth, pale, almost luminous white skin. Tanned skin was associated with labourers and slaves who toiled outdoors. A porcelain complexion was the ultimate status symbol, proof that you lived a life of leisure indoors. To achieve this, you turn to your pot of sarussa. It's a thick white paste made from lead shavings soaked in vinegar. You carefully apply a layer to your face, neck, and arms, creating a smooth white canvas. The effect is immediate and striking, but you're literally painting your skin with a potent neurotoxin. You know the risks, at least vaguely. Stories circulate of women suffering from tremors, tooth decay, and even madness from long-term use. But the social pressure is immense. Every respectable woman of status wears it. To go without would be like showing up to a modern gala in sweatpants. So you paint on the lead, hoping the short-term gain of a flawless complexion doesn't lead to a long-term. Well, you try not to think about it. It's a dangerous game of chance, but beauty demands sacrifice. You add a touch of colour to your cheeks with red ochre, or, for the more affluent, a substance called vermilion, which is derived from toxic cinnabar, mercury sulfide. A little bit of lead, a little bit of mercury. You're a walking chemical hazard, but you look fantastic. Next, you focus on your eyes. The goal is to make them look large and dramatic. You use a fine stick or a small brush to apply kohl, a dark powder made from soot, antimony, or ground lead sulfide. You line your eyes carefully, extending the line outwards in an almond shape, a style borrowed from Egypt that the Romans adored. The dark powder makes your eyes pop against your pale skin, but again, the primary ingredient is often lead. It's a strange irony that the very thing you use to attract a mate could, over time, cause serious health problems, including infertility. Now for the truly exotic part of the regimen, a treatment that makes lead makeup seem almost reasonable by comparison. You've heard whispers of a new ultra-luxurious face mask that promises to rejuvenate the skin, smooth wrinkles, and leave you with a youthful glow. The key ingredient? Crocodile dung. Yes, the excrement of the fearsome Nile reptile, known as Crocodilorum sturcus. It would be mixed with clay or mud and applied as a warm, pungent facial. The theory, as far as you can tell, is that the potent enzymes and acids would have a restorative effect. You can't imagine the smell, let alone the sensation of slathering it on your face. It's a testament to the extremes people will go to for beauty. Thankfully, you've opted for a more conventional mask of honey and ass's milk, which was famously used by Cleopatra and later by Poppaea, Emperor Nero's wife. She reportedly travelled with an entire herd of female donkeys just to ensure a fresh supply for her daily bath. This obsession with elaborate and often toxic beauty routines is a mainstream historical fact. Archaeological discoveries of small glass and ceramic pots containing traces of these ancient cosmetics, along with literary descriptions from writers like Pliny the Elder, confirm their widespread use. These weren't just for the ultra-wealthy empress. Women of various social strata participated in these rituals to enhance their appearance according to the period's strict standards. The ideal was pale skin, rosy cheeks, and large, dark eyes, and they used whatever was available to achieve it regardless of the health risks. A more quirky and less discussed aspect of Roman beauty involved hair removal. The poet Ovid, your trusty dating coach from the other night, explicitly advised women to ensure their legs were free of rough hair. Smooth skin was considered essential. Roman women achieved this through various methods, including plucking with tweezers called volselli, shaving with razors, or using early depilatory creams. These creams were often made from caustic substances like arsenic or quicklime, which could burn the skin if left on for too long. It was a painful, often smelly process, but a necessary one to meet the expectations of a potential partner. As you finish your preparations, you look in the polished bronze mirror. The reflection that stares back is a carefully constructed work of art, but how much of it is truly you? Historians still argue whether these intensive beauty rituals were seen as an oppressive chore forced upon women by a patriarchal society, or if they were embraced by women themselves as a form of self-expression, power, and personal artistry. Were they victims of impossible standards, or were they active agents in crafting their own public identity, using cosmetics as a tool to navigate their social world and exert influence? The answer is likely a complex mix of both. You add one last touch, a small artificial beauty spot, or splenium, cut from a piece of dark leather or silk. You place it high on your cheekbone. It's a final playful flourish. You're ready. You walk out into the garden, a vision of Roman beauty, your skin glowing with lead, your eyes lined with antimony, smelling faintly of roses and ambition. You hope your suitor appreciates the effort, and you pray you don't smudge. Your courtship in the garden is a success, filled with whispered poetry and the sweet taste of figs and honey. The lead-based makeup didn't kill you, and the conversation flowed. But as time marches on, the world you know begins to crumble. The solid, predictable foundations of the Roman Empire are fracturing. Barbarian tribes press at the borders, the economy sputters, and a new, powerful faith is spreading like wildfire across the landscape. You see the old temples to Jupiter and Venus falling into disuse, their marble steps collecting dust and weeds. In their place, new basilicas rise, dedicated to a single, all-powerful god. The world of Ovid, with his cheeky advice and celebration of earthly pleasures, is fading into memory. A new era is dawning, and with it, a radically different set of rules for love, desire, and the human heart. You find yourself in a world reshaped by Christian thought. The pursuit of romance, once a celebrated game, is now viewed with deep suspicion. It's a distraction from the true purpose of life, the salvation of the soul. The new role models aren't witty poets or brave gladiators. They are ascetics, hermits, and martyrs who renounce worldly pleasures for spiritual purity. At the forefront of this ideological shift are the Church Fathers, influential theologians and writers whose interpretations of Scripture would shape Western civilization for 1,000 years. And few are more influential or more severe in their views on love and marriage than St. Jerome. Imagine sitting not on a cushioned couch at a dinner party, but on a hard wooden bench in a dusty scriptorium, listening to the words of a man like Jerome. He is a formidable scholar, the man responsible for translating the Bible into Latin, the Vulgate, a monumental achievement. But when he speaks of relationships between men and women, his tone is one of dire warning. To Jerome, desire is a fire that threatens to consume the soul. The ideal state, he argues, is virginity, a life wholly dedicated to God. Marriage is a concession, a lesser path for those too weak to remain celibate. He famously wrote, "I praise marriage, but I praise it because it produces virgins." It's not exactly the kind of sentiment you'd put on a wedding invitation. In his letters, which were widely circulated, Jerome offered advice to women, particularly wealthy Roman widows and young girls, urging them to dedicate their lives to Christ rather than remarrying or seeking a husband. He describes the annoyances of married life with pointed sarcasm, the screaming of infants, the anxiety of managing a household, the demands of a husband. He paints a picture of marriage not as a partnership of love and support, but as a form of servitude. To love your spouse too ardently, he suggests, is a form of adultery. You should love your wife with judgment, not passion. This is a complete 180-degree turn from the world of ars amatoria. The very passion Ovid taught you to cultivate is now the thing you must suppress. This dramatic shift in attitude towards love and marriage is a fundamental historical fact of the late antique period. The rise of Christianity brought with it a new emphasis on asceticism and the sinfulness of the flesh. This wasn't just a theological debate, it had real-world consequences, profoundly altering social norms around courtship, marriage, and sexuality. The body was no longer something to be adorned and celebrated, but a vessel of temptation that needed to be disciplined and controlled. The old Roman family structure, centred on the paterfamilias and political alliance, was gradually replaced by a new model centred on the sacramental, indissoluble nature of Christian marriage, a union that was, paradoxically, seen as inferior to a life of chastity. A quirky and somewhat sad tidbit from this era comes from the life of Jerome himself. He developed a close but strictly platonic friendship with a wealthy and intelligent Roman widow named Paula. Together with her daughter, Eustochium, they formed a circle of devout Christian ascetics. Jerome taught them scripture, and they used their wealth to fund his scholarly projects, eventually following him to Bethlehem to establish a monastery and a convent. However, his intense and often emotional letters to these women and his fierce advocacy for their chaste lifestyle led to scandalous rumours in Rome. His enemies accused him of improper conduct, twisting his spiritual guidance into something sordid. It's a strange irony that the man who so fiercely preached against worldly desire was himself plagued by gossip about it. He was forced to leave Rome under a cloud of suspicion, a clear sign of how difficult it was for society to understand intense, non-romantic relationships between men and women. You feel the chill of this new morality. The simple act of looking at someone with admiration is now fraught with spiritual peril. A compliment on their appearance might be seen as an invitation to vanity. A lingering touch, once a thrilling part of courtship, is now a potential gateway to lust. The world is becoming more serious, more solemn. The vibrant colours of the Roman garden party seem to be fading to grey, and so the central debate among scholars of this period continues. Historians still argue whether the ascetic ideals promoted by figures like Jerome were fully adopted by the general populace, or if they remained the province of a spiritual elite. Did the average farmer or craftsman really worry that loving his wife too much was a sin? Or did the old ingrained human instincts for love, companionship and affection carry on largely unchanged beneath the surface of official doctrine? It's likely that for most people, life was a negotiation between the hearts, desires and the priest's sermons. You're caught in the middle of this great transition, a cultural whiplash that leaves you wondering how you're supposed to find a partner in a world that tells you the very desire to do so is a problem. The game has changed, and the new rulebook is filled with warnings. The stone basilicas and the solemn warnings of men like Jerome cast a long shadow over the ruins of the Roman world. But as you travel north, away from the Mediterranean heart of the old empire, the air changes. You leave behind the world of Latin sermons and theological debates, and enter a realm of damp forests, misty hills, and smoke-filled mead halls. You're in Anglo-Saxon England, a land of warrior kings, poetic skalds, and a different, older kind of magic that Christianity hasn't yet fully stamped out. Here, if you want to win someone's heart, you don't suppress your desires. You try to bind them with a spell. You find yourself huddled on a rough-hewn bench in a large wooden hall. The air is thick with the smell of roasting pork, sweat, and damp wool. A fire pit in the centre of the room spits and crackles, sending smoke up towards a hole in the thatched roof. The lord of the hall, his beard braided and his arms covered in gold rings, presides over his warriors, who are drinking fermented honey wine, mead, from polished horns. It's a loud, boisterous and intimidating scene. Across the hall you see the person you desire. They are laughing with their friends, their face illuminated by the firelight. Approaching them directly, a stranger in this tight-knit community feels impossible, so you seek out an alternative, a quieter, more secret path to their affection. You slip away from the hall and seek the counsel of a cunning woman, or a leech, a local healer who knows the old ways. She lives in a small hut at the edge of the village, surrounded by bundles of drying herbs that give the air a sharp, earthy scent. You tell her your predicament, and she nods knowingly. For a price, a silver coin, a sack of flour, she will share the secrets of a Galdor, a love charm. The process is far more complex than simply buying a potion. First, there are the ingredients. You must gather them yourself, under specific conditions. You might be told to find a sprig of yarrow, but only one that has grown on a grave. Or you might need to dig up the root of a plantain, but only at sunset on a Tuesday, and you must use a stag's antler to do it, not an iron tool, lest you break the magic. These aren't just random instructions. They are steeped in a worldview where every plant, every animal, every time of day holds a specific power. Once you have your strange bouquet of graveyard yarrow and sunset-dug plantain, the next step is the incantation. The cunning woman teaches you a rhyming chant, a string of poetic alliterative lines in Old English. You must learn it by heart. The words are powerful, meant to be spoken aloud to awaken the magic within the herbs. The charm might call upon ancient, half-forgotten gods or spirits of the land, names that are never uttered in the new stone church being built down the road. It might say something like, "May you be as eager for me as the bee, for the blossom as the heart for the spring." You practice the words, your voice a low murmur in the quiet hut, feeling the weight and rhythm of the ancient language. The final step is the delivery system. How do you get this magical concoction to your intended? You can't exactly hand them a cursed weed from a cemetery. The methods are subtle. You might be instructed to secretly sew a charmed leaf into the hem of their tunic. Or more commonly, you would grind the herbs into a powder and try to slip them into their food or drink. You imagine yourself back in the mead hall, trying to casually sprinkle some magic dust into your crusher's horn of mead without anyone noticing. It's the Anglo-Saxon equivalent of trying to slip someone your number, but with way more legal and supernatural risk. A botched love spell could easily be interpreted as an attempt at poisoning, which would not end well for you. This belief in the efficacy of charms and spells is a well-documented historical fact for the period. We know about these practices from surviving texts, particularly a collection of medical and magical remedies from the 10th century known as the Lacnunga, which translates roughly to remedies. This manuscript contains a fascinating mix of practical herbal medicine, Christian prayers, and pagan charms, showing how these different belief systems coexisted and blended together. One famous charm, for a sudden stitch, involves feverfew, red nettle and plantain, and calls for the chanting of a powerful incantation while brandishing a knife. The same logic applied to matters of the heart. A particularly quirky tidbit from the world of Anglo-Saxon magic involves a ritual for bringing back an absent lover, or perhaps attracting a new one. The spell requires the person to go out at dawn, turn east, then west, then south, then north. After each turn they would perform a series of bows and chants. Then they had to take a piece of their own clothing, a sample of their hair, or even nail clippings, and bury it in the ground at a crossroads, along with a specific set of herbs. The idea was that this would bind the target's path to theirs, magically drawing them together. It's a deeply personal form of magic, using a part of yourself to influence the will of another. Of course, the church fiercely opposed these practices. Priests and bishops condemned them as demonic and backward. But for many ordinary people, the new Christian God seemed distant and concerned with the grand matter of salvation, while the old magic offered practical solutions to immediate everyday problems, like a toothache, a failing crop, or an unrequited love. Historians still argue whether these folk magic practices represented a genuine survival of pre-Christian pagan religion, or if they were simply a form of superstitious folk belief that had long been detached from its original religious context. Was the person performing the charm actively worshipping an old god, or were they just going through a series of traditional motions that were believed to work, without much thought for the theology behind them? As you leave the cunning woman's hut, a small pouch of dried herbs clutched in your hand, you feel a strange mix of hope and trepidation. You're caught between two worlds. In one, love is a dangerous sin to be suppressed. In this one, it is a force to be captured and controlled through secret words and powerful plants. It's certainly a more proactive approach than the one offered by St. Jerome. Now you just have to figure out how to get close enough to that mead horn. You pocket the pouch of Anglo-Saxon love herbs, deciding that magical sabotage at a crowded feast is probably a bad idea. You need a change of scenery, a culture with a more direct approach. A cold, salt-laced wind whips at your cloak, and the sound of waves crashing against a wooden hull fills your ears. The world of misty forests and cautious charms gives way to the icy spray of the North Sea. You are on a longship, its dragon-headed prow cutting through the grey water. You have fallen in with the Norsemen, the people we call Vikings, and you're about to discover that their approach to courtship is as bold, pragmatic, and surprisingly complex as they are. Your first lesson in Viking romance happens not in a quiet garden or a clandestine meeting, but in the middle of a rowdy gathering. The Longhouse is even more chaotic than the Anglo-Saxon mead hall. The air is thick with the smoke of a central fire, the smell of boiled fish, and the press of unwashed bodies. A poet, a skald, is reciting a long, intricate saga about gods and giants. But soon, the entertainment takes a more personal turn. Two warriors stand up, eyeing each other from across the fire. They're about to engage in flighting. Flighting is a ritualized exchange of insults, a poetic duel of wits and wordplay. It's a verbal battle where each contestant tries to outdo the other with clever, often obscene, and deeply personal taunts about their courage, their lineage, their hygiene, and their romantic prowess. You watch, fascinated, as they trade elaborate, alliterative verses, each line dripping with sarcasm and bravado. Your sword arm is as limp as a week-old leek, one might bellow to the roar of the crowd. The other might retort, "I've seen braver spirits in my grandmother's brewing vat." This isn't just a drunken argument. It's a highly respected art form, and strangely enough, it's part of the dating scene. A man or woman who can hold their own in a flighting duel, who can deftly defend their honour and cleverly attack their opponents, demonstrates intelligence, confidence, and a quick mind, all highly attractive qualities. In a society that values strength, both physical and mental, being able to verbally crush your rivals is serious foreplay. It's like a modern-day rap battle, but the stakes are your social standing and your shot at romance. You realise you'd need to seriously upgrade your insult game from "I know you are, but what am I?" to survive here. Of course, poetic skill isn't enough. For a man to be considered a worthy suitor, he must also prove his worth in more tangible ways. This meant demonstrating his ability to provide for a family and protect a household. A mainstream historical fact of Viking society is its foundation in raiding and trading. A young man was expected to go a Viking, that is, to travel abroad on raids or long-distance trade journeys. Returning with silver, silks, and other treasures was the ultimate proof of his success and ambition. It was the Viking equivalent of showing up for a date, in a fancy car. It demonstrated status and capability. A man who stayed at home and never risked the open sea was seen as unenterprising and a poor marriage prospect. So, to win the affection of a Norse woman, you would need to be a warrior, a poet, a world traveller, and a successful entrepreneur. The expectations are high. But what about the women? Norse women, particularly in the early Viking age, enjoyed a level of freedom and authority that would have been unthinkable to their contemporaries in Rome or Anglo-Saxon England. They could own property, inherit land, and run the family farm or business while their husbands were away. They were not passive figures waiting to be claimed. They were active participants in the choice of a spouse. A quirky and fascinating tidbit that highlights this is the existence of bride prices and dowries that worked in a way that empowered the woman. When a man wanted to marry, his family would pay a mundraki or bride price to the bride's family. However, a significant portion of this, along with a dowry from her own family called a heimanfylgja, became the woman's personal property. It remained hers throughout the marriage. This financial independence gave her considerable power within the household and society. Furthermore, if the marriage didn't work out, divorce was surprisingly straightforward. Both a man and a woman could initiate a divorce. All that was required was for the unhappy party to declare their intention to divorce in front of witnesses, first at their bedside, then at the threshold of their home, and finally at the local assembly, or thing. The reasons could be as simple as dissatisfaction or as serious as abuse. If a husband struck his wife, for example, she had grounds to divorce him immediately, and crucially, she would take her property, both the dowry and the bride price, with her. This made mistreating your wife a very costly mistake, You see this pragmatism in action. A young woman rejects a suitor not because he isn't handsome, but because his last trading voyage yielded only a small amount of walrus ivory. Another couple decides to part ways, dividing their property with the cool-headed logic of business partners. It's a far cry from the soul-consuming, eternally binding Christian sacrament of marriage that was taking hold further south. This has led to a spirited debate that scholars still engage in. Historians still argue whether the sagas, the epic Old Norse stories that provide much of our information about Viking life, present an accurate picture of gender relations, or if they offer a romanticised, idealised version. The sagas are filled with powerful, assertive, and often vengeful women, like Gudrun in the Laxdæla saga, who orchestrate complex social and political manoeuvres. Are these characters representative of real Viking women, or are they literary creations designed to make the stories more dramatic? Archaeological evidence, like the graves of women buried with keys as a symbol of their household authority, suggests there's a strong core of truth to the saga's portrayal. As the longship finally makes landfall, you step onto the rocky shore feeling a strange sense of respect for this culture. Their approach to love and marriage is unsentimental and practical, yet it's built on a foundation of mutual respect and a clear understanding of individual worth. There are no love spells or fake tears here. Your value is determined by your actions, your wits, and your wealth. It's a tough, competitive market, but at least you know exactly where you stand. And if things go wrong, you can just call it quits and get your stuff back. The pragmatic, if chilly, world of the Vikings fades as you journey south again, back into the heart of mainland Europe. The landscape changes. The rough-hewn longhouses and icy fjords are replaced by rolling fields, vineyards, and the rising stone turrets of castles. A new age is dawning, one that will attempt to tame the brutal warrior ethos of the past and channel it into a new, sophisticated, and impossibly demanding code of conduct. You've arrived in the High Middle Ages, and you're about to be ensnared by the glittering, treacherous web of chivalry. You're no longer a Viking raider or an Anglo-Saxon farmer. You're a young squire training to become a knight. Your days are spent not on a longship, but in a castle courtyard. You learn to wield a sword and a lance, to ride a war horse in full armour, and to study the complex strategies of siege warfare. But your education doesn't stop there. An equally important, and perhaps more difficult part of your training involves learning the rules of chivalry. This isn't just a loose set of guidelines. It's an all-encompassing ideology that dictates how a knight should behave in all aspects of his life, especially in his interactions with women of noble birth. Your instructor, a grizzled, scar-faced knight who has seen a dozen battles, drills you relentlessly. A knight is sworn to defend the weak and the defenceless, he barks, as you practice your swordplay. He must be courageous in battle, but merciful to a fallen foe. This is the martial side of chivalry, the part about honour and valour in combat. But then the lesson shifts. And when you are in the presence of a lady, he says, his voice lowering, you are no longer a warrior. You are her humble servant. You must be courteous, gentle, and unfailingly polite. Your speech must be refined, your manners impeccable. This is a profound change. The raw, aggressive masculinity of the earlier warrior cultures is now expected to be tempered with grace and refinement. You must learn to be a lion on the battlefield and a lamb in the great hall. The ideal knight is a paradox, a deadly warrior who can also compose poetry, a man of action who is also a man of delicate feeling. It's a tough balancing act. One moment you're learning how to unhorse an opponent with a 12-foot lance, and the next you're being corrected on which fork to use for the roasted peacock. You see this code in action at a tournament. The event is a vibrant spectacle of colour and sound. Pennants and banners flutter from the tops of brightly coloured tents. The thunder of hooves echoes across the field as knights in gleaming, polished armour charge at each other, their lances shattering against shields in a spray of splinters. It's a display of military prowess, a mainstream historical fact that tournaments were the primary venue for knights to practice their skills, win renown, and earn prize money. But it's also a romantic theatre. Before the joust, each knight chooses a lady from the stands to be his champion. He will ride before her, dip his lance in salute, and declare that he fights in her honour. She might give him a token to wear, a scarf, a ribbon, or a glove, which he will tie to his helmet or lance. This small piece of silk becomes a sacred object, a symbol of his devotion. All his victories on the field that day are dedicated to her. He is not just fighting for himself, he is fighting to prove himself worthy of her admiration. This public display elevates the brutal sport into a performance of romantic devotion. After the tournament, there is a feast and a dance. Here, the rules are just as strict. You must escort a lady to the table, ensuring you walk on the outside closest to the wall as a symbolic protector. You must serve her the choicest cuts of meat and keep her wine goblet filled. You must not speak too loudly or boast of your accomplishments. Instead, you should praise her beauty, her wit, or her virtue using flowery, indirect language. A compliment might be, "The stars themselves are shamed by the light in your eyes." A direct, "You look nice," would be considered hopelessly crude. A quirky and somewhat bizarre aspect of this chivalric devotion could extend to almost comical extremes. Some tales from chivalric romances describe knights performing acts of absurd self-abasement to prove their love. A knight might vow to wear a patch over one eye until he has performed a great deed in his lady's name, essentially jousting half-blind. Another famous story tells of the knight Ulrich von Liechtenstein, who, in an attempt to prove his devotion, had his own lip surgically deformed to resemble his lady's, because she had once casually remarked that it was not to her liking. He then embarked on a jousting tour across Europe, dressed as Venus, the goddess of love, challenging all comers in his lady's honour. It's a level of commitment that borders on madness, a far cry from just buying someone flowers. This whole elaborate system raises a question that historians still debate. Historians still argue whether the code of chivalry actually improved the treatment of women, or if it simply placed them on an impossible pedestal. On one hand, the emphasis on courtesy and protection was a clear attempt to curb the violence and brutality of a martial aristocracy. It theoretically offered women a new kind of respect and security. On the other hand, it defined women in a very narrow way, as beautiful, passive objects of adoration and inspiration for men's great deeds. The ideal lady of chivalry was meant to be admired from afar, a pristine inspiration, not a partner or an equal. She was the prize to be won, not a player in the game. Did this code empower women by making them the arbiters of a knight's honour, or did it disempower them by trapping them in a gilded cage of idealised femininity? As you, the young squire, try to remember all these rules, be brave, be gentle, be poetic, don't boast, serve the lady, fight for her honour, you feel a dizzying sense of pressure. The path to love is no longer a straightforward negotiation like in Viking lands, nor is it a matter of magic. It is a performance, an endless and exhausting audition for the role of the perfect knight. One wrong move, one clumsy compliment, one act of poor manners, and you could be shamed in front of the entire court. The age of chivalry has arrived, and it is dazzling, noble, and utterly terrifying. You've mastered the basics of chivalry. You can joust with the best of them and offer a lady a roasted swan's wing without making a fool of yourself. You understand that your strength as a knight must be matched by your courtesy as a gentleman. But just as you think you have the rules figured out, you're introduced to a new, even more complex and bewildering layer of the game. It's a subgenre of chivalry, a secret unwritten doctrine whispered in the halls of power, celebrated in the songs of troubadours and practiced by the highest echelons of the nobility. It is the art of fin amour, or as we call it, courtly love. You find yourself in the sun-drenched region of Provence in southern France, the birthplace of this strange and beautiful phenomenon. The courts here are not just military centres, they are hubs of culture, poetry and music. The formidable Duchess Eleanor of Aquitaine, one of the most powerful women in European history, has made her court at Poitiers a vibrant centre for this new kind of romantic expression. And the first, most important rule of courtly love is this: it almost never involves your wife. The object of your affection, the lady you are to adore with every fibre of your being, is typically another man's wife. And not just any man's wife. She is the wife of your lord or another high-ranking nobleman. She is beautiful, intelligent, powerful, and most importantly, completely and utterly unattainable. This, you learn, is the entire point. True, pure love, according to this code, can only exist outside the crass, practical and loveless bonds of arranged marriages. Marriage was about land, wealth, and heirs. Courtly love was about love, or at least a very specific, highly ritualized performance of it. Your relationship with this noble lady is not meant to be a sordid affair. In its purest form, it is entirely platonic. You are her secret admirer, her devoted servant. Your goal is not to get her into bed, though that was certainly a theme in some of the more risky poems, but to become a better man through your adoration of her. Her very existence is meant to ennoble you. The thought of her inspires you to be more courageous in battle, more virtuous in your conduct, more eloquent in your speech. You are in a state of perpetual lovesick longing, and this suffering is seen as a refining fire that burns away your impurities. It's a romantic hamster wheel powered by unfulfilled desire. So how do you practice courtly love? It's a game of secrecy, subtlety, and agonizing patience. You might exchange glances with your lady across a crowded hall, a fleeting look that says more than 1,000 words. You compose poetry for her, filled with coded language and metaphors, praising her virtues in extravagant terms. You might send these poems to her via a trusted intermediary, perhaps one of her ladies-in-waiting. You would wear her colours in a tournament, as you did with basic chivalry, but now it has a deeper, more secret meaning. Only you and she know the true significance of the green silk scarf tied to your arm. The entire process is a structured ordeal, a series of stages. First is the initial sight of the lady, which strikes you like a thunderbolt. Then comes the distant worship from afar. After that, you might progress to a stage of timid declaration, where you finally reveal your feelings, often in a trembling, humble confession. If she accepts your devotion, she may grant you small favours, a kind word, a smile, that you will treasure like holy relics. The relationship is deliberately modelled on the feudal relationship between a vassal and his lord. The lover submits himself entirely to his lady, promising obedience and loyalty. He calls her maidens, a masculine term meaning my lord, to emphasise his subservience. This entire elaborate system is a historical fact, spread throughout the high courts of Europe by travelling poets and singers known as troubadours. These were the rock stars of their day, composing and performing complex lyric poems about the joys and mostly pains of courtly love. Their songs cemented the tropes: the beautiful but distant lady, the suffering lover, the secret signals, the jealous husband, jaloux, and the ever-present risk of discovery. A quirky and illustrative tidbit of this tradition is the concept of the cabal, or the secret sign name for the beloved. In his poems, a troubadour would never name his lady directly, as that would be a grave breach of secrecy and honour. Instead, he would refer to her by a code name, *Senhal. The great troubadour Bernard de Ventadorn, for example, referred to his patron and object of adoration, Eleanor of Aquitaine, as Good Hope and Fair Seer in his poems. This allowed him to publicly declare his undying love while maintaining a thin, elegant veil of plausible deniability. It was the medieval equivalent of a cryptic social media post that's secretly about your crush. The whole concept is so bizarre and so contrary to both church doctrine and common sense that it has fueled endless academic discussion. Historians still argue whether courtly love was a real social practice that people actually lived by, or if it was purely a literary convention, a game of love confined to poetry and song. Was a knight really expected to fall into a tormented, secret love for his lord's wife, with all the immense danger that entailed? Or was it just a fashionable topic for entertainment, a way for the aristocracy to feel sophisticated and emotionally complex? Some argue it was a way for young landless knights to navigate the treacherous social landscape of the court, gaining favour and patronage from powerful women. Others suggest it was a civilizing influence, teaching a warrior class how to manage their emotions and behave with grace. As you stand in the torchlit hall of the court of Poitiers, you feel hopelessly out of your depth. You're supposed to adore a woman you can never have, to suffer beautifully, and to find nobility in unrequited love. It is a system designed to create maximum romantic tension with minimum resolution. It's elegant, it's poetic, and it's deeply, profoundly weird. You thought the rules of chivalry were complicated, but they were a simple board game compared to this multi-dimensional chess of the heart. You catch the eye of the Duchess from across the room. She offers a barely perceptible nod. Your game has just begun. The unspoken rules of courtly love are dizzying. You're trying to be a humble servant to a powerful, unattainable lady, suffering in the most poetic way possible, all while hoping her notoriously short-tempered husband doesn't notice your soulful glances over the wine carafe. It's exhausting. You find yourself wishing there was an official handbook, a concrete set of regulations to guide you through this emotional minefield. And then, one day, a clerk, in the service of the Countess Marie de Champagne, the daughter of Eleanor of Aquitaine, hands you a book. It's a slim volume, but its contents are explosive. It's called De Amore, or The Art of Courtly Love, written around the year 1185 by a man named Andreas Capellanus, or Andrew the Chaplain. Finally, you think, a rule book. You eagerly open the treatise. Andreas, writing at the behest of his patroness Marie, claims to be instructing a young man named Walter on the art of love. The book is structured like a formal academic or legal text, complete with dialogues and lists of rules. It seems to be the definitive guide you've been searching for. The first part of the book defines love. Love is a certain inborn suffering derived from the sight of and excessive meditation upon the beauty of the opposite sex, Andreas writes. He adds that it causes the lover to wish, above all things, the embraces of the other, and by common desire to carry out all of love's precepts in the other's embrace. Okay, you think. A little melodramatic with the inborn suffering part, but it seems to be heading in the right direction. The book then lays out a series of dialogues, demonstrating how men of different social classes, a commoner, a nobleman, a higher nobleman, should properly woo women of corresponding classes. The arguments are presented in a formal, almost legalistic style. A nobleman trying to woo a commoner might emphasise his refined character, while she might argue that she is unworthy of his station. It's a script for the very performance you've been struggling with. You learn the correct way to praise a lady, the proper way to declare your passion, and how to respond to her objections with eloquent, persuasive arguments. But it's the final section of the book that contains the most famous and most contradictory pieces of advice. Andreas presents a series of rules of love, supposedly handed down by a court of love, presided over by noble ladies like Marie de Champagne herself. There are 31 rules in total, and as you read them, your confusion only deepens. Rule number 1 hits you like a cold fish. Marriage is no real excuse for not loving. You read it again. Marriage is no real excuse for not loving. This single sentence codifies the entire premise of courtly love, that true love exists outside of, and is fundamentally incompatible with, the institution of marriage. This is a stunningly radical idea to write down, a direct challenge to the authority of both the church and the social order. You continue down the list and the rules get stranger. Rule 2. He who is not jealous cannot love. Rule 6. Boys do not love until they arrive at the age of maturity. Rule 13. When made public, love rarely endures. Rule 14. The easy attainment of love makes it of little value. Difficulty of attainment makes it prized. Rule 26. Love can deny nothing to love. And the most perplexing of all, Rule 21. Real jealousy always increases the feeling of love. The book is essentially telling you that your love must be secret, difficult, and fueled by a constant state of jealousy and anxiety. It's a recipe for a nervous breakdown, presented as a guide to romantic bliss. The existence of De Amore is a solid historical fact. Dozens of manuscripts survive, a testament to its popularity and wide circulation in the Middle Ages. It was the definitive text on the subject, read and debated in aristocratic circles across Europe. It provided a vocabulary and a framework for the very real social games being played in the courts of France, England, and Germany. It gave a name and a set of regulations to the feelings and tensions that the troubadours sang about. However, a deeply quirky tidbit about this supposedly definitive rulebook is its final chapter. After spending 2 books meticulously laying out the rules for how to obtain and keep a lover, Andreas Capellanus adds a 3rd book titled The Rejection of Love. In this section, he abruptly and completely reverses his position. He launches into a furious misogynistic tirade, denouncing women as greedy, deceitful, and morally corrupt. He warns his young student Walter to avoid love at all costs, arguing that it leads to spiritual damnation and worldly ruin. He uses every cliché in the book, claiming women are leaky vessels of sin and the root of all evil. It is one of the most jarring tonal shifts in all of literature. This abrupt reversal has led to centuries of scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Andreas Capellanus' book is a sincere guide to the practice of courtly love, or if it is a work of elaborate satire. Is he genuinely celebrating this adulterous, secretive form of love? only to tack on a pious retraction at the end to protect himself from the wrath of the church? Or is the entire work a parody from the very beginning, designed to expose the absurdity and immorality of the courtly ideal by taking it to its logical extreme? The final chapter could be the punchline to a very long, very dry joke, essentially saying, "See all this complicated nonsense I just taught you? It's terrible, don't do it." There is no consensus. Some scholars take it at face value, others see it as a masterpiece of irony. You close the book, more confused than when you started. You came looking for clarity and found a bundle of contradictions. You now have official-sounding rules that tell you marriage and love are incompatible, that jealousy is good, and that the whole endeavour is probably a terrible idea that will ruin your life. The handbook is a paradox. It's a manual on how to play a game, written by someone who concludes by flipping the board over and storming out of the room. You're no closer to understanding your lady, the Duchess, but you have a much deeper appreciation for just how convoluted the medieval heart could be. You decide to stick with Rule 13, keep it quiet. It seems to be the only one that makes any practical sense. The contradictory rules of Andreas Capellanus swim in your head. You're supposed to be jealous, but not too jealous. Secret but sincere, devoted but to someone else's spouse. The mental gymnastics are exhausting. You begin to think that maybe the Anglo-Saxons had the right idea after all. Relying on your own wit and poetry is clearly not working. Perhaps what you need is not a better line, but a better quality magical intervention. The sterile, intellectual game of courtly love feels cold and unsatisfying. You crave something more definite, a guaranteed result. You decide to seek out a more potent solution, one that bypasses the mind and targets the heart directly. You are going to an apothecary to buy a love potion. You leave the brightly lit castle and its suffocating etiquette behind, making your way to the darker, more cluttered streets of the town that huddles at its base. You find the apothecary's shop tucked away in a narrow alley, its windows filled with murky glass jars containing unidentifiable floating objects. A sign above the door, a simple wooden board painted with a mortar and pestle, creaks in the wind. You push open the heavy oak door, and a small bell jingles. The air inside is thick and cloying, a bewildering mix of smells: dried herbs, bitter chemicals, sweet resins, and something vaguely metallic and unpleasant. The apothecary himself is a stooped figure in a stained apron, his fingers blackened with chemicals. He peers at you over a pair of spectacles perched on his nose. He looks less like a magician and more like a scientist. But you know that in this era, the line between the two is blurry at best. An apothecary didn't just dispense medicine for coughs and fevers, he dealt in the full spectrum of human desire and despair. People came to him for sleeping draughts, poisons, and, of course, philters to compel love. You explain your situation in hushed tones, feeling foolish and desperate. The apothecary listens patiently, nodding as if this is the most common request in the world, which it probably is. He shuffles over to a dark wooden cabinet, its drawers labelled with faded spidery script. He begins to pull out ingredients, and you watch with a growing sense of unease. This isn't just a matter of mixing a few flower petals. The components of a serious medieval love potion are visceral, strange, and deeply unsettling. He might pull out a dried seahorse, which was believed to be a powerful aphrodisiac, or perhaps a small pouch containing Spanish fly, a powder made from the crushed bodies of a specific type of blister beetle. The active ingredient, cantharidin, is a powerful irritant that could cause a burning sensation and, in theory, stir the passions. In reality, it was a dangerous poison that could cause severe pain, kidney failure, and death. It was a high-risk, low-reward strategy for romance. The joke about a burning love suddenly feels a little too literal, but the most sought-after and most infamous ingredient is the mandrake root. The apothecary might show you one, a gnarled brownish root that vaguely resembles a human figure with two legs branching off a central torso. The mandrake, or mandragora, was surrounded by a terrifying legend. It was believed to grow under gallows, sprouting from the bodily fluids of a hanged man. The root was said to let out a blood-curdling scream when pulled from the earth, a scream so powerful it could kill anyone who heard it. To harvest it safely, you were supposed to tie a rope from the plant to a dog, plug your ears with wax, and then entice the dog to run, pulling the root from the ground. The dog would die, but you would have your magical ingredient. It's an elaborate and gruesome backstory for what is essentially a narcotic and hallucinogenic plant from the nightshade family. The use of these kinds of concoctions is a well-established historical fact. Medical texts and pharmacopoeias from the Middle Ages list ingredients for all sorts of potions, and court records are filled with cases of people being tried for using filters to enchant, harm, or control others. The Church, of course, vehemently condemned this practice as a form of witchcraft and demonic interference. A priest would tell you that trying to force someone to love you through a potion was a mortal sin, an attempt to subvert God's gift of free will. But for many, the temptation was too strong. A particularly quirky tidbit related to love magic is the belief in the power of bodily fluids and personal items. If a mandrake root was too expensive or too dangerous to acquire, a more homespun love charm might involve obtaining a lock of your beloved's hair, their nail clippings, or even a thread from their clothing. These items would be incorporated into a charm or potion. A more intimate and, to modern sensibilities, deeply unhygienic method involved using one's own sweat, blood, or saliva. The idea was to magically introduce a part of yourself into the other person, creating an unbreakable sympathetic bond. You might be instructed to bake a piece of your hair into a loaf of bread, and then ensure your beloved eats it. It gives a whole new meaning to the phrase, "the secret ingredient is love." As the apothecary grinds his strange ingredients together with a mortar and pestle, you start to have second thoughts. The line between a love potion and a poison seems dangerously thin. What if you get the dosage wrong? What if, instead of falling in love, your lady falls gravely ill? And what kind of love would it be anyway? A love that is compelled by magic, not freely given. This question fuels a scholastic debate from the period, one that still fascinates historians. Theologians and philosophers argued about the nature of magically induced love. If a potion truly worked and made someone fall in love with you, was that love real? Did the person's soul genuinely feel affection, or was it merely their body and passions being manipulated by demonic forces? Can a person be held morally responsible for actions committed under the influence of such a charm? This debate gets to the very heart of medieval concepts of free will, sin, and the nature of the soul. The apothecary finishes his work. He pours a small amount of a murky brownish liquid into a tiny vial and corks it tightly. "Just a few drops in her wine," he whispers, his eyes glinting. "She will not be able to resist you." He names his price, and it's steep. You look at the vial in your hand. It represents a shortcut, a way to bypass all the rules, all the poetry, all the potential for rejection. But it also represents a dark and dangerous path. The choice is yours, the noble suffering of courtly love, or the guaranteed but tainted success of a magic potion. The little bottle feels very heavy in your palm. You look down at the vial of murky love potion from the apothecary. The thought of secretly drugging your beloved, even with the intention of winning her affection, sits poorly with you. It feels like cheating, a violation of the very ideal of love you're supposed to be pursuing. You thank the apothecary for his time, leave the potion on his cluttered counter, and step back out into the medieval street, breathing in the comparatively fresh air. There has to be a middle ground, you think. Something more proactive than pining away in a corner, but less sinister than magical coercion. You're looking for a courtship ritual, not a crime. As you wander through the town, you notice that the world is full of small, everyday rituals of connection. You see a baker offering a hot bun to a young woman, their hands brushing as she takes it. You see a weaver showing a finely made piece of cloth to a merchant, their heads bent close together in shared appreciation. It occurs to you that food, that most basic of human needs, is a powerful medium for social interaction. And you soon learn that in some parts of Europe, it was at the centre of one of the strangest courtship customs imaginable. You travel in your mind to a lively country fair. The air is filled with the sound of pipes and drums, the laughter of children, and the bleating of sheep. People from all the surrounding villages have gathered to trade goods, compete in games of strength, and most importantly, to socialise. Young men and women eye each other, freed for a day from the strict supervision of their parents and priests. And here, in the midst of the festivities, you witness the peculiar ritual known as the armpit apple. The custom, which seems to have been most prevalent in rural folk traditions, particularly in parts of Austria and Germany, is as bizarre as it sounds. A young woman who wishes to signal her interest in a man will take a peeled apple slice and hold it in her armpit for a time, usually during a dance. The goal is to let the apple slice become thoroughly saturated with her sweat. After the dance, flushed and glowing, she will approach the man of her choice and offer him the sweat-soaked slice of apple. You watch as a young woman does exactly this. She offers the damp, fragrant apple to a blacksmith's apprentice, his face still smudged with soot. He knows the custom. This is not a prank. It is a genuine, if pungent, token of affection. Now, he has a choice. If he is not interested, he can politely refuse it, and she will move on, perhaps a little embarrassed, but no real harm is done. But if he is interested, if he accepts her silent proposal, he must eat the apple slice right there, in front of her. It is an act of acceptance, a signal that he returns her feelings and embraces her, quite literally, scent and all. It's the ultimate taste test. As you watch the blacksmith's apprentice bravely chomp down on the apple, you can't help but marvel at the raw, earthy honesty of it all. In an age before commercial deodorants, this was courtship at its most primal. The science of pheromones wouldn't be understood for centuries, but these people were acting on an instinctual understanding that scent was a powerful component of attraction. Forget a witty poem or a silk scarf, this was a direct biological offering. "This is me," the gesture says, "in my most fundamental unadorned state. Do you accept me?" It's a level of intimacy that makes a shared glance across a banquet hall seem positively sterile. You make a mental note that if anyone ever offers you a suspiciously damp piece of fruit at a dance, you should probably clarify its origins before taking a bite. This type of folk custom, centered on shared food, is a documented, if not mainstream, historical fact. While the armpit apple is one of the most extreme examples, the tradition of love apples or sweetheart tokens made of food was widespread. A young woman might bake a special cake or gingerbread figure, sometimes in the shape of a man, and give it to her intended. Often, these baked goods would be spiced with expensive and exotic ingredients like ginger, cloves and cinnamon, which were believed to have aphrodisiac properties. The sharing of food was a powerful symbol of a potential union, a promise of future domesticity and shared sustenance. A quirky and related tidbit from medieval courtship rituals involves the simple hazelnut. In some regions, hazelnuts were seen as symbols of fertility and love. A young man might offer a pocketful of nuts to a woman as a casual, deniable gesture of interest. If she accepted them, it was a good sign. An Old English rhyme goes, "If you would be a happy wife, on your wedding night eat a hazelnut for a happy life." Furthermore, there were divination games played with nuts on holidays like Halloween or All Hallows Eve. A young woman would place 2 nuts on a fire grate, naming one for herself and one for her beloved. If the nuts roasted quietly side by side, it meant a long and happy future together. If one or both of them hissed and jumped away from the heat, it foretold a troubled or failed romance. The existence of these diverse and often hyper-local folk customs creates a fascinating puzzle for scholars. Historians still argue whether these rituals, like the sweat-soaked apple, represent a separate, parallel dating culture for the common folk, one that operated completely independently of the aristocratic codes of courtly love. Did the farmer's daughter in a rural village have any concept of the elaborate platonic suffering that a duchess was supposedly inspiring in a knight? Or were these two entirely different worlds, with their own unique languages of love? The evidence suggests that while the nobility were playing their sophisticated games of verbal chess, the common people were engaged in a much more direct, tangible, and sometimes saltier form of courtship. You think back to the court, to the agonizing over secret signals and the fear of a misplaced word. Then you think of the simple, terrifying honesty of offering someone a piece of fruit that carries your personal scent. One is a romance of the mind, an intellectual exercise. The other is a romance of the body, a biological pact. Both are attempts to solve the same fundamental human problem: how to bridge the gap between two people. You have to admit, there's a certain admirable boldness to the armpit apple. It's weird, it's unhygienic, but at least there's no ambiguity. You know exactly where you stand. The rustic honesty of the armpit apple, while bold, doesn't seem like a viable strategy for your situation back at the castle. Besides, your courtship goals are becoming more serious. The playful glances and secret poems are one thing, but in the medieval world all roads eventually lead to marriage. And marriage isn't just about uniting two people, it's about uniting two families, and, most crucially, producing heirs to carry on the family name and inherit the land. Before any betrothal can be finalised, the families involved need some assurance that the union will be a fruitful one. This brings you face to face with one of the most pseudo-scientific and deeply strange corners of medieval life: fertility testing. You find yourself in a solar, a private chamber in the castle, where your prospective bride is being examined. But there are no blood tests, no genetic screenings. The methods used are a bizarre combination of folk wisdom, garbled classical medicine, and sheer guesswork. The person conducting the examination might be a midwife, an elderly female relative, or even the town's apothecary, the same one who tried to sell you that dubious love potion. The stakes are incredibly high. A woman deemed infertile could see her marriage prospects vanish overnight, facing a future of social shame or a life in a convent. One of the most common and least invasive tests involves a humble onion. The method, described in various medieval medical texts, including the famous Trotula, instructs that a peeled onion or a clove of garlic should be inserted into the woman's vagina and left there overnight. If her breath smelled of onion or garlic in the morning, she was considered fertile. The scientific theory behind this was that a fertile woman had an open and unobstructed body, allowing the essence of the onion to travel freely from her lower regions all the way up to her mouth. If there was no smell, it was believed to indicate a closed or blocked womb, and therefore infertility. You can only imagine the sheer awkwardness of the morning after smell test. It's a profoundly intimate and deeply unscientific examination, all based on the pungency of an allium. Another popular method of diagnosis involved uroscopy, the detailed examination of urine. This wasn't just for fertility. Pea prophets, as they were sometimes called, claimed to be able to diagnose a whole range of ailments by looking at a vial of urine. They would hold it up to the light, studying its colour, consistency, and sediment. They might even smell it or, in some horrifying cases, taste it. For fertility, specific signs were sought. According to one school of thought, the urine of a fertile woman would be a clear, pale lemon colour, with a slight cloudiness in the middle. Reddish or thick urine was a bad sign. Some uroscopy practitioners took it a step further. A woman's urine might be mixed with wine and left to sit. The resulting mixture would be observed for changes, though the texts are often frustratingly vague about what constituted a positive or negative result. Another test involved lacing a ribbon in the woman's urine and then burning it. The smell of the smoke was thought to indicate her fertile status. It's a strange and desperate kind of chemistry, a desperate search for answers in a world that lacked the tools to find them. Of course, the burden of fertility was placed almost entirely on the woman. If a couple failed to conceive, she was almost always presumed to be the one at fault. However, there were a few rare tests for male infertility as well. One text suggests that a man should urinate into two separate pots, one containing wheat and the other barley. The pots would be watered with his urine for several days. If the seed sprouted, he was fertile. If they failed to grow, he was the source of the problem. It's a slightly more scientific approach, testing the life-giving properties of a bodily fluid, but still a long way from a modern sperm count. The practice of uroscopy and other folk medicine fertility tests is a mainstream historical fact. Medical manuscripts from the period are filled with these recipes and diagnostic charts. The uroscopy wheel, a diagram that linked different colours and consistencies of urine to specific diseases, was a standard tool for many physicians. It highlights the medieval reliance on observation of external symptoms and bodily excretions to understand the mysterious inner workings of the human body. It was a medicine of signs and symbols, not of microbiology. A quirky and particularly revealing tidbit about medieval fertility beliefs is the concept of the wandering womb. This idea, inherited from ancient Greek medicine, held that a woman's uterus was not a fixed organ, but a free-floating entity, almost like an animal within her body. If a woman was not having regular intercourse, her womb could become dry and light, causing it to wander around her body in search of moisture. This wandering womb was blamed for all sorts of female ailments, from shortness of breath, the womb pressing on the lungs, to hysteria and fainting spells. The cure? Marriage and regular pregnancy, which would weigh down the womb and keep it in its proper place. It's a medical theory that conveniently doubles as a powerful tool for social control. The very nature of these tests reveals a deep anxiety about lineage and inheritance, but it also opens up a scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether these tests were primarily medical procedures or social rituals. Was the onion test genuinely believed to be a reliable diagnostic tool by the practitioners? Or was it, at least in part, a piece of theatre designed to satisfy the families involved, a ritual to provide a semblance of certainty in an uncertain situation? The performance of the test, with its solemn instructions and dramatic reveal, may have been as important as the result itself. It was a way for the community to assert control over the mysterious process of reproduction, even if that control was ultimately an illusion. As you stand outside the solar, waiting for the verdict, you realise that this is the harsh, pragmatic reality that underpins all the poetry and romance. Love is beautiful, but heirs are essential. The future of a noble house, the ownership of the very castle you stand in, depends not on the quality of a sonnet, but on the outcome of a test involving a vegetable. The pressure is immense, a stark reminder that in this world a woman's worth is often measured by her womb. The door creaks open. The midwife emerges, her face unreadable. You hold your breath, waiting to hear if her breath smells of onions. Thankfully, the onion test is a success, and the wedding negotiations proceed. The world of prenuptial uroscopy and wandering wombs fades into the background. You're now officially in a courtship, a state that is less about secret pining and more about public performance under the watchful eyes of two families. The pressure has changed. It's no longer about winning her, affection, but about proving you're both a respectable, well-behaved couple. Every glance, every word, every gesture is now subject to intense scrutiny. You are learning that in the highly structured world of the medieval court, even the simplest, most natural human expressions are governed by a strict and often bewildering set of rules. You're at a feast celebrating the betrothal. You sit next to your intended, but there is a respectable, chaperone-approved distance between you. You want to make her laugh, to share a moment of genuine connection in this stiff, formal atmosphere. You whisper a funny observation about a portly baron who is struggling to stay awake. She smiles, a beautiful, radiant smile that lights up her whole face, and then you see her mother, a stern-faced matron from across the table, shoot her a look of pure, unadulterated disapproval. Your fiancé's smile vanishes instantly, replaced by a polite, demure and completely closed-mouthed curve of the lips. You have just witnessed a major breach of medieval etiquette. For a well-born lady, a wide, toothy smile was considered shockingly indecent. It was seen as unrestrained, immodest, and almost animalistic. Showing one's teeth when smiling or laughing was associated with peasants, tavern wenches, and women of loose morals. A proper, virtuous lady was expected to keep her emotions in check. Her smile should be subtle, a gentle lifting of the corners of the mouth, never revealing the teeth within. Her laughter should be a low, musical tinkle, not a hearty, open-mouthed laugh. It's a form of emotional corsetry, tightly lacing up any expression of unbridled joy. You begin to notice this everywhere. The ideal of feminine beauty and behaviour is one of stillness and restraint. A lady should walk with small, gliding steps, her eyes modestly downcast. She should speak in a low, gentle voice. When she eats, she should take tiny, delicate bites. The goal is to be as unobtrusive and gracefully controlled as possible. Any sudden movements, loud noises, or overly expressive gestures were considered unladylike and vulgar. It's a complete reversal of the modern ideal of being open and expressive. Here, your fiancé is being coached to be a beautiful, passive, and perfectly controlled object. This prescribed subtlety extended to the entire language of courtship. Since open displays of affection were forbidden, everything had to be communicated through a complex system of non-verbal cues. The glance, or l'œillade, was a key tool. A brief direct look into someone's eyes could be a bold declaration of interest. A fleeting glance, followed by immediately looking away with a slight blush, was the expected response from a modest lady. The way a woman held her head, the way she toyed with a piece of jewellery, the way she accidentally dropped her handkerchief, all of these were part of a silent, coded conversation, happening right under the noses of the chaperones. It required immense skill and attention to detail to both send and receive these signals correctly. One misinterpreted glance could lead to a week of lovesick confusion. The historical reality of these strictures on feminine expression is well documented in courtesy books and didactic literature from the period. These were manuals written to instruct young men and women on proper behaviour. Texts like The Book of the Knight of the Tower or Christine de Pizan's The Treasure of the City of Ladies are filled with advice for women on how to maintain their reputation through modest and controlled conduct. A lady's honour was a fragile thing, and a single act of perceived immodesty, like laughing too loudly at a joke, could tarnish it permanently. This wasn't just about being polite, it was about protecting her value as a marriage prospect and the honour of her entire family. A quirky and specific example of this obsession with control can be seen in the advice given about table manners. Medieval etiquette guides for women are incredibly detailed. One guide advises a lady never to scratch herself at the table, no matter how much she might itch. Another warns against leaning her elbows on the table or speaking with her mouth full. But some go even further, instructing a woman to keep her lips clean of grease so that when she drinks from a shared cup, a common practice at feasts, she doesn't leave an unsightly smudge on the rim. It was considered a mark of supreme elegance to be able to eat a greasy piece of meat and then drink from a goblet without leaving any trace. It's a small detail, but it speaks volumes about the constant microscopic level of self-monitoring that was expected of them. This intense focus on female modesty and restraint has led to a continuing debate among social historians. Historians still argue whether these restrictive etiquette rules were solely tools of patriarchal oppression designed to control women, or if women themselves wielded them as a form of social power. Could a lady use the rules of modesty to her advantage? By mastering the art of the subtle glance and the demure smile, a woman could manipulate situations and communicate her desires without ever breaking the rules and risking her reputation. Was it a cage, or was it a complex game that women, as the primary keepers of its rules, could become expert players of, using their prescribed passivity as a kind of strategic weapon? You look at your fiancée, who is now carefully dabbing her closed lips with a napkin after taking a sip of wine. Her face is a perfect mask of polite, serene neutrality. You wonder what she's really thinking. Is she bored, annoyed, amused? Her expression gives nothing away. You have passed the fertility tests and navigated the family politics, but you realise you're now engaged to a woman whose true feelings are hidden behind an impenetrable wall of good manners. The pursuit of a love in this world isn't just about finding a partner, it's about learning to read a language where nothing is ever said aloud, and a smile is a carefully guarded secret. The wedding day comes and goes, a grand affair full of ceremony and feasting. You are now a married man. The games of courtship, the secret glances, the armpit apples, the rule books, all of that is behind you. You might think that now, within the safe and sanctified bonds of matrimony, you are free to love your wife as you see fit. You would be wrong. The most powerful institution in your world, the church, has a great deal to say about what happens after the wedding, and its advice is often just as bizarre and contradictory as any rule of courtly love. You decide to go to confession. It's a regular part of your spiritual life. But now that you're married, you have a new category of potential sins to worry about. You kneel in the dark, cool space of the church, the scent of old stone and beeswax incense in the air. You can see the silhouette of your parish priest through the carved wooden screen of the confessional. You confess your minor sins of the past week, a moment of anger, a flash of envy. And then you ask for guidance, as a newly married man, on how to conduct yourself honourably within your union. The priest clears his throat. He begins by reminding you that the primary, and for some hardline theologians, the only legitimate reason for marital relations is procreation. The act is a necessary, if regrettable, part of fulfilling God's commandment to be fruitful and multiply. It is a duty, a task to be undertaken for a specific holy purpose. To engage in the act for any other reason, for pleasure, for comfort, or even just for affection, is to slide down a slippery slope towards the sin of lust. He pulls out a book, a penitential manual. These were guidebooks for priests, listing an exhaustive catalogue of sins and their corresponding penances. You listen, dumbfounded, as he outlines the church's bafflingly specific regulations. You learn that certain days are strictly off-limits for any marital intimacy. You must abstain on Sundays because it's the Lord's Day. You must also abstain on Wednesdays and Fridays in observance of fasting. You must abstain for the entire 40 days of Lent, during Advent, and around Pentecost. You also have to abstain on major saints' days and feast days. When you add it all up, it seems like there are more forbidden days than permitted ones. You would need a liturgical calendar just to plan a romantic evening. It's a celestial cock-block of epic proportions. The priest continues, his voice a low monotone. The position of the act is also of grave moral importance. The only approved position is the one he refers to as the ritus debitus, the missionary position, as it was deemed the most natural and least pleasure-focused, most oriented towards conception. Any other variation was considered a perversion, an imitation of animal behaviour, and a serious sin. The penitential manuals contain detailed lists of these unnatural acts, each with a specific penance attached, ranging from a few days of fasting to years of bread and water discipline. But the most mind-bending piece of advice you receive is a callback to the teachings of St. Jerome, whom you encountered long ago in the ruins of Rome. The priest warns you, in all seriousness, against loving your wife too much. To love your wife with excessive passion, he explains, is to turn her into an idol. You are committing adultery with your own wife if you desire her for her own sake, rather than for the children she will bear. Your love for her must be moderate, rational, and secondary to your love for God. He quotes St. Jerome, "A man who is an ardent lover of his wife is an adulterer." You are being told that the very foundation of what you consider to be a loving marriage, passion, desire, and deep affection, is, in the eyes of God, a sin that needs to be confessed and corrected. The Church's intense regulation of marital life is a well-established historical fact. The penitentials of the early and high Middle Ages, with their detailed tariffs of penance for specific sins, are a testament to the clergy's attempt to govern every aspect of their flock's lives, right down to the most intimate details. These manuals provide an incredible, if biased, window into the sexual anxieties and norms of the period. They show a deep suspicion of pleasure and a constant effort to channel human sexuality exclusively towards procreation within a tightly controlled framework. A quirky and particularly strange tidbit that emerges from these penitentials is the belief in the supernatural consequences of breaking these rules. It was widely believed that conceiving a child on a forbidden day, or in a forbidden manner, could have dire consequences for the offspring. The child might be born with physical deformities, epilepsy, which was often seen as demonic possession, or a predisposition to sin. One text warns that a child conceived on a Sunday might be born a leper. This belief served as a powerful deterrent. It wasn't just about your own soul. The spiritual and physical health of your future children was at stake. This intense focus on the sinfulness of pleasure has created a long-running debate. Historians still argue whether the strict teachings of the Church, as laid out in these penitential manuals, were actually followed by the laity, or if they represented an idealistic and largely ignored clerical fantasy. Did the average medieval couple really consult a calendar of saints' days before being intimate? Did they truly believe their passion for each other was a form of adultery? Or did they, as one historian memorably put it, simply sin and shrug? The evidence is scarce, as the private lives of ordinary people rarely make it into the historical record. But it's likely that for most, life was a negotiation between official doctrine and basic human nature. You leave the confessional feeling completely bewildered. The secular world of courtly love told you to passionately adore an unattainable woman. Now the sacred world of the Church is telling you to be dispassionate and moderate, with the one woman you are legally and spiritually bound to. One set of rules punishes you for not loving enough, the other for loving too much. It seems that no matter what you do, you're doing it wrong. You look at your wife across the nave of the church, where she's lighting a candle. She seems so familiar, and yet, according to the rulebooks of your world, she's a source of constant, complex, and contradictory spiritual danger. Marriage, it turns out, was not the end of the game. It was just the beginning of a new, even more complicated level. Your head is spinning from the priest's lecture on the myriad ways your marriage could lead to damnation. The rules are overwhelming, contradictory, and seem designed by men who have little to no understanding of life as a woman. Your wife, you realise, is navigating an even more complex world than you are. She's expected to be a pious Christian, a fertile mother, an efficient household manager, and a demure tooth-concealing beauty. You wonder where she gets her advice. Her practical, real-world guidance for surviving this gauntlet of expectations. It certainly isn't from the celibate priest or the lovesick troubadours. One afternoon you find your wife in the solar, deeply engrossed in a manuscript. It's not a book of poetry or a prayer book. It's a practical manual, a collection of advice written for women, by women. This is a rare and precious thing. You catch a glimpse of the text. It's a copy of the work known as the Trotula. the most famous and influential compendium of women's medicine from the Middle Ages. As you learn more about its contents, you realise it's a treasure trove of shockingly practical, sometimes bizarre and deeply insightful advice on everything from childbirth to cosmetics. This is the secret rulebook you never knew existed. The Trotula is not one book, but a collection of 3 separate texts, likely assembled in the southern Italian port city of Salerno around the 12th century. Salerno was a unique crossroads of knowledge, with influences from Latin, Greek and Arabic medical traditions. The most famous section, on the conditions of women, is attributed to a historical female physician named Trota of Salerno, a rare example of a woman practicing medicine in a male-dominated field. The book she inspired is refreshingly direct and free of the moralizing tone of the priests. It addresses women's health concerns with a practical, empirical approach. You discover that this Trotula offers solutions to problems your wife would never dare discuss with a man. One major concern is body odour. In a world of infrequent bathing and heavy wool clothing, managing smells was a constant struggle. The book offers a recipe for a surprisingly sophisticated herbal deodorant. It instructs the reader to mix cloves, spikenard and nutmeg with rose water, and then place small linen-wrapped bundles of the mixture under the arms. Another recipe suggests a powder made from iris root and cloves to be dusted on the body. It's a far cry from the sweat-soaked apple. This is about eliminating, not celebrating, natural scents. The book is also brutally honest about the cosmetic challenges women faced. It provides recipes to smooth wrinkles, get rid of blemishes, and even to lighten skin. Remember the Roman obsession with a pale complexion? That hasn't gone away. But the Trotula offers a safer alternative to the toxic lead-based creams. One recipe calls for a facial ointment made from lily root, borax and camphor. Another suggests washing the face with the foam from boiling white beans. But the hair dyeing recipes are perhaps the most striking. To become a blonde, a woman is advised to mix alum and oak galls with water and apply it to her hair, then sit in the sun to let it lighten. For a rich, dark black, the recipe is more organic. The instructions are to take green lizards, cut off their heads and tails, cook them in common oil, and then anoint the head with the resulting concoction. If green lizards aren't to your taste, an alternative involves earthworms, minced and steeped in oil. It's a stomach-turning process, but it shows the lengths to which women would go to achieve a desired look, and the kind of folk remedy knowledge that was passed down through generations. You can just imagine the conversation. "Darling, your hair looks lovely. Is that a new rinse?" "Thank you, it's lizard." The existence and popularity of the Trotula is a major historical fact. It was translated into multiple languages and circulated widely across Europe for centuries, becoming the standard reference work on gynecology and women's health. It stands as a powerful testament to the presence of female medical practitioners and the transmission of practical woman-to-woman knowledge, a world of healing that operated largely outside the formal, male-dominated universities that were beginning to form. One of the most quirky and forward-thinking tidbits in the Trotula is its approach to infertility, a subject you remember with a shudder. Unlike the priests and many male physicians who automatically blame the woman, the Trotula explicitly states that the problem could lie with either the man or the woman. It offers diagnostic advice for male infertility, suggesting that his seed might be too thin, too watery, or too hot. It even provides recipes for treatments to improve male fertility, involving ingredients like rocket and parsnip, which were believed to enhance virility. This balanced, diagnostic approach was centuries ahead of its time, and a stark contrast to the misogynistic wandering womb theories. The Trotula also gives surprisingly compassionate advice for deceits, ways for a woman to conceal perceived flaws or navigate difficult situations. It includes a recipe for a lotion that could temporarily tighten the skin and create the appearance of virginity, a potentially life-saving trick for a woman whose honour was questioned before marriage. It also offers advice on how to hide a pregnancy, or conversely, how to simulate the signs of menstruation to perhaps avoid the unwanted attentions of a husband on a non-forbidden day. This has sparked a fascinating scholarly debate. Historians still argue about the true authorship and interpretation of the Trotula. For a long time, many male historians refused to believe a woman could have written such a knowledgeable medical text, and argued that Trotula was a male pseudonym. While the consensus now accepts the historical reality of Trota of Salerno, the debate continues over the text's meaning. Is it a purely medical text, a straightforward collection of remedies, or is it also a book of resistance, a subtle guide for women on how to manage their bodies and their lives in a patriarchal society that sought to control them? Are the deceits simple cosmetic tricks, or are they tools of female agency, allowing women to exert a small measure of control over their own destinies? You look at your wife, her head bent over the pages filled with recipes for lizard oil hair dye and fertility cures for men. You realise you are glimpsing a secret world of knowledge, passed from woman to woman, that is pragmatic, resourceful, and centred on survival. It's a world that doesn't care about the rules of courtly love or the penance tariffs of the church. It's about dealing with the messy physical realities of being a woman in the Middle Ages. And it is, in its own way, far more powerful and enduring than any poem or sermon. The practical, earthy wisdom of the trotula feels like a grounding force in a world of conflicting ideals. But as the Middle Ages wane, a new power rises, one that will overshadow courtly manners and even clerical rules in the arrangement of a marriage. That power is money. The world is changing. A new merchant class is growing wealthy in bustling cities. Trade routes are expanding, and the old feudal system based on land and loyalty is giving way to a more fluid, cash-based economy. You find yourself transported forward in time to the dawn of the Renaissance. The air smells not of damp castles but of commerce, ambition, and freshly minted gold florins. Love, you're about to learn, is now officially a business transaction. You're no longer a knight or a squire. You're the head of a prosperous Florentine merchant family. Your days are spent in a counting house, not a courtyard. You track shipments of wool from England and spices from the Levant. Your greatest skills are negotiation and arithmetic. You have a daughter of marriageable age. She's educated, beautiful, and witty, but you know that in the eyes of the world, her most important attribute is the size of her dowry. The dowry is the sum of money, goods, and property that a bride's family gives to the groom or his family upon their marriage. It is the central pillar upon which the entire edifice of Renaissance marriage is built. You spend years setting aside funds, investing wisely, all to accumulate a dowry that will attract a suitable husband for your daughter. A larger dowry means a better match, a husband from a more powerful family, which in turn means better business connections and enhanced social status for your own clan. It is the single most important investment you will ever make. The process of arranging a marriage is now a formal multi-stage negotiation that resembles a corporate merger. First, you engage the services of a professional marriage broker, a censal. This is a man who knows all the eligible bachelors and bachelorettes in the city, their family histories, their political affiliations, and most importantly, their financial situations. He is part real estate agent, part private investigator, and part society columnist. You sit with the censal in your study, poring over ledgers. He presents you with a list of potential suitors for your daughter. For each one, he details the family's assets, their political connections, and what they are looking for in a bride and a dowry. The Strozzi boy is promising, he might say, but they need a dowry of at least 2,000 florins to fund their new silk venture. You counter, my daughter's dowry is 1,500 florins, but she brings with her a connection to the Medici Bank. The negotiation is complex and unsentimental. You are essentially trading your daughter's future for your family's advancement. Her personal feelings about any of these young men are, at this stage, completely irrelevant. Once a potential match is agreed upon, the fathers of the bride and groom meet to hammer out the details of the marriage contract, the sponsalia. This is a legally binding document, witnessed by a notary. It specifies the exact amount of the dowry, when and how it will be paid, and the penalties for breaking the agreement. It might detail everything from the number of fine dresses the bride will bring with her, her trousseau, or corredo, to the specific properties being transferred. This focus on the dowry and the contractual nature of marriage is a core historical fact of the Renaissance period, particularly in the city-states of Italy. The surviving records of families like the Medici are filled with detailed accounts and correspondence relating to marriage negotiations. These were not affairs of the heart. They were strategic alliances crucial for political stability and economic growth. The prosperity of a city like Florence was built, in part, on a foundation of well-arranged, well-funded marriages. A quirky and telling detail of this process is the public ceremony of the giving of the ring, or l'anellamento. After the contract was signed, but before the wedding, the groom would visit the bride's house, often with a large procession of his family, to place a ring on her finger. This was the moment the couple, who may have never spoken to each other before, would finally meet. The bride, heavily chaperoned, would be on display, her beauty and modesty judged by her new in-laws. It was a deeply awkward and high-pressure first date, conducted in front of an audience of dozens. The bride was expected to be a silent, beautiful symbol of the agreement her father had just made. After this ceremony, the dowry payment would begin, and this is where a fascinating quirk of the Florentine system comes in. The city of Florence actually operated a state-run dowry fund, the Monte del Dotti. A father could invest a small sum of money in this fund when his daughter was young. The state would then manage the investment, and over a period of 7 to 15 years, it would grow significantly through compound interest, providing a substantial dowry by the time the girl was of marriageable age. It was part insurance policy, part government bond, and it reveals how deeply integrated the dowry system was into the very fabric of the state's economy and social structure. It was, in essence, a publicly funded marriage market. The central role of the dowry has created a long-standing debate among scholars. Historians still argue whether the Renaissance dowry system was a tool for female oppression or a source of female power. On one hand, it clearly commodified women, reducing their value to a monetary figure and making them pawns in their father's strategic games. A girl from a poor family with no dowry had almost no chance of making a good marriage. On the other hand, the dowry legally belonged to the wife. If her husband died, the dowry had to be returned to her from his estate, providing her with financial security in her widowhood. In this sense, it was a woman's primary source of economic power and independence in a patriarchal world. Was it her price tag or her safety net? The answer, uncomfortably, is both. You look at your daughter, who is practicing her embroidery in the corner of the room, feigning disinterest in the negotiations that will determine her entire future. You have secured a match with the son of a prominent wool merchant. The dowry is agreed upon. The contract is being drawn up. You have done your duty as a father. You have secured your family's legacy. But as you watch your daughter's skilled hands work the needle, you feel a pang of something you can't quite put into your ledger. You hope, silently, that this carefully calculated business deal might, by some happy accident, also contain a little bit of love. The marriage contract is signed, the dowry is being paid in installments, and your daughter is betrothed. The cold, hard business is done. But now, a new phase of the game begins. The Renaissance court, particularly in sophisticated city-states like Florence, Urbino and Milan, is not just a place of political power and commerce. It is a theatre of social performance. To succeed here, to truly belong to the elite, it's not enough to be wealthy or well-connected. You must also be charming, witty, graceful, and knowledgeable. You and your family must now master the art of being the perfect courtier, and there is a new, wildly popular book that tells you exactly how to do it. You find yourself holding a copy of Il Libro del Cortegiano, the Book of the Courtier, by Baldassare Castiglione, published in 1528. This isn't a book of rules like Andreas Capellanus's, nor a practical manual like the Trotula. It's a sophisticated philosophical dialogue set in the glittering court of Urbino, describing a series of conversations among nobles about the qualities of the ideal gentleman and lady. It is the new Bible of social conduct, and its central, most important concept is a quality called sprezzatura. Castiglione defines sprezzatura as a certain nonchalance, so as to conceal all art and make whatever one does or says appear to be without effort and almost without any thought about it. It is, in short, the art of making the difficult look easy. It is studied carelessness. It is rehearsed spontaneity. The perfect courtier must be skilled in a vast number of things. He should be a brave warrior, a skilled horseman, a graceful dancer, a talented musician, and a knowledgeable scholar of Greek and Latin. But he must never, ever look like he's trying too hard. You watch a young nobleman at a court gathering and see sprezzatura in action. He's asked to recite a poem. He feigns reluctance, saying he hasn't prepared anything. Then, after some gentle prodding, he reluctantly agrees and delivers a flawless moving sonnet, seemingly making it up on the spot. In reality, he has spent weeks memorizing and practicing it. Later, he joins a dance and moves with effortless grace, as if he was born to it, concealing the countless hours he spent with the dance master. He makes a witty, insightful comment about a painting, presenting it as a casual observation, when in fact it's the result of hours of study. He is a master of effortless excellence. To be seen to be practicing or straining would be the height of vulgarity. It's the Renaissance equivalent of posting a perfect, candid photo that actually took 50 takes to get right. This ideal of sprezzatura is a core historical fact of the Renaissance court. Castiglione's book was an instant bestseller, translated into every major European language. It became the essential guide for anyone with social aspirations, from kings down to minor gentry. It shaped the Western ideal of the Renaissance man and woman, and codified a new form of masculinity based on elegance and intellectual prowess, as much as on martial skill. Being a courtier was now a profession, and this was its training manual. The book also has plenty of advice for the ideal court lady. She too must be a master of sprezzatura. She should be knowledgeable about art, music and literature, but should not be overly academic or showy about her learning. She must be graceful, charming and witty. But her primary role is to be a beautiful and inspiring audience for the accomplishments of the men. Castiglione writes that she should be a moderating influence, her gentleness tempering the rougher edges of the male courtiers. Her chief quality is a kind of soft, pleasing grace. A quirky and specific piece of advice from Castiglione concerns humour. The courtier must be funny, but not a buffoon. He warns against practical jokes, crude humour, or making fun of the physically deformed, things that were common sources of laughter in the Middle Ages. The ideal courtier's wit is subtle, clever, and intellectual. He tells a story about a man who, when asked by his wife if he was going to wear a particular cloak to a wedding, replied, "And what if the cloak doesn't want to go to the wedding?" It's a dry, cerebral kind of joke, a world away from the boisterous fun of a mead hall. Castiglione even offers advice on how to gracefully receive a joke at your own expense, smiling wryly as if you're in on it, never losing your cool composure. It's all about maintaining that effortless, elegant control. This elevation of effortless grace and intellectual wit has led to a significant scholarly debate. Historians still argue whether Castiglione's vision of the courtier was a reflection of a social reality or the creation of an impossible ideal. Did the courts of Italy truly abound with these perfect, multi-talented individuals who could discourse on Plato and then effortlessly win a joust? Or was the Book of the Courtier a form of aspirational literature, a beautiful fantasy that few, if any, real people could ever live up to? Was it a guide? Or was it a beautiful fiction that served to legitimize the power of the ruling class by portraying them as naturally superior beings? The truth likely lies somewhere in between. It was an ideal to strive for, even if it was rarely, if ever, fully achieved. You now understand the new challenge facing you and your family. Your daughter cannot simply be a well-dowered bride. She must become a court lady. She must learn to play the lute, but not too well. She must be able to discuss Petrarch, but not so deeply as to seem pedantic. She must be a charming and witty conversationalist, but always with an air of modest, graceful ease. And you, as the patriarch, must project an image of effortless command. Your vast commercial wealth presented not as the product of grubby calculation, but as the natural result of your innate superiority. You are all actors on a highly polished stage, and the goal is to perform your roles so perfectly that you forget you're even performing. The pressure to be perfect, and to make that perfection look like an accident, is immense. It makes the simple honesty of the armpit apple seem like a lost paradise. The sophisticated, sun-drenched courts of Renaissance Italy, with their philosophical debates on sprezzatura, feel a world away as you travel north. The sky becomes greyer, the air cooler. You've arrived in Tudor England at the court of King Henry VIII. The glitter of Castiglione's ideals is still present. Men are expected to be poets, musicians and soldiers, but it's overlaid with a thick, chilling layer of political intrigue, religious turmoil and mortal danger. Trying to find love here is not a game of social grace. It's a high-stakes gamble, where one wrong move, one misplaced flirtation, could literally cost you your head. You are a young courtier, newly arrived at Whitehall or Hampton Court. The palaces are magnificent, a riot of red and gold Tudor livery, intricate tapestries, and the latest Renaissance architecture. But beneath the opulent surface, the atmosphere is thick with paranoia. The king, in his obsessive quest for a male heir, has broken with the Catholic Church in Rome, declared himself the head of the Church of England, and is in the process of dissolving the monasteries. The court is split into factions, those who favour the old religion and those who embrace the new Protestant reforms. Every conversation is a potential trap, every friendship a potential liability. Your goal is to win the affection of a young lady in waiting, perhaps one in the service of the current queen. But approaching her is like navigating a minefield. You cannot simply walk up and talk to her. All interactions are public, scrutinised by 100 pairs of eyes. Your first move, just as in the courts of chivalry, is likely through poetry. You must be able to compose a passable sonnet or a short lyric poem. You might write about her eyes being brighter than stars or her voice being sweeter than music, the standard stuff. But here, even a simple love poem can be a political act. If you use language or imagery associated with the Virgin Mary to praise your beloved, a common medieval trope, you might be accused of harbouring secret Catholic sympathies. Your poetry has to be not just beautiful, but theologically and politically safe. You might try to catch her eye during a dance. The dances at the Tudor court are elaborate formal affairs like the pavane or the galliard. The galliard is particularly athletic, with complex steps and high leaps for the men. It's a chance to show off your grace and vigour, your Castiglione-esque sprezzatura. For a brief moment you get to touch your partner's hand, but this touch is fleeting and formal. A squeeze that is held a second too long, a glance that is too intense, could be reported back to the lady's family, or worse, to a rival who might use it to discredit you. The most dangerous part of the Tudor dating game, however, is the king himself. Henry VIII is a charismatic but deeply egotistical and ruthless monarch. He considers the ladies of his court, particularly the Queen's maids of honour, to be under his personal authority. And he has a roving eye. It is a well-known historical fact that Henry chose two of his future wives, Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, from among his current wife's ladies-in-waiting. This created an environment of intense competition and peril. If the king takes an interest in the same lady you are pursuing, you must drop your suit immediately and without complaint. To compete with the king is not just foolish, it is treasonous. You have to watch, smiling politely, as the most powerful man in the kingdom flirts with the woman you admire. But the situation is equally dangerous for the lady. If she encourages the king's advances, she might rise to a position of immense power, but she also puts herself in immense danger. The fates of Henry's queens are a chilling testament to this. Divorced, beheaded, died. Divorced, beheaded, survived. If she rejects the king's advances, she risks incurring his wrath, which could bring ruin upon her entire family. It's an impossible choice. A quirky and tragic tidbit that perfectly illustrates this perilous environment is the story of Thomas Culpeper and Catherine Howard, Henry's fifth wife. Culpeper was a handsome, swaggering courtier, a gentleman of the Privy Chamber who had close access to the king. Catherine was the king's young, vivacious new queen. Before her marriage, she and Culpeper may have had some kind of romantic understanding. After she became queen, they were foolish enough to continue their relationship, arranging secret meetings with the help of the Queen's lady-in-waiting, Lady Rochford. They exchanged love tokens and flirtatious notes. It was a classic tale of courtly romance, but in Henry's court, it was a death sentence. When their affair was discovered, it was framed not as adultery, but as high treason. Both Culpeper and the Queen were beheaded. Lady Rochford, who had merely facilitated the meetings, was executed as well. The story sent a shockwave of terror through the court. This constant threat of royal interference and lethal consequences fuels a historical debate that is still active. Historians still argue about the degree of agency that women like Anne Boleyn or Catherine Howard had in their relationships with the king. Were they ambitious, calculating players in the game of court politics, actively seeking to capture the king's affection to advance themselves and their families? Or were they primarily victims, young women caught in a system they could not control, forced into a dangerous relationship with a powerful and predatory monarch? The answer is complex and likely differs for each woman, but it highlights the impossible pressures placed on women at the Tudor court, where romance was inseparable from ambition and survival. You stand in the Great Hall, watching the masks and listening to the music. You see the lady you admire, but you also see the king watching her. You see the spies of the rival court factions noting every interaction. The love poem you wrote feels incredibly naive in your pocket. In this court, desire is not a private emotion. It is a public commodity that can be leveraged for power or punished with death. The charming nonchalance of ye sprezzatura feels like a very thin mask hiding a face of pure fear. You decide the safest course of action is to become intensely interested in falconry, or perhaps the theological justification for the dissolution of the lesser monasteries. Anything is safer than trying to date in the court of Henry VIII. You survive the treacherous court of the Tudors by keeping your head down and your love poems to yourself. The world moves on, the religious wars that tore Europe apart begin to cool, and a new era of opulent theatrical grandeur emerges. You find yourself in the late 17th or early 18th century, the Baroque period. You're at a magnificent ball in a Parisian palace or a Venetian palazzo. The room is a dizzying spectacle of powdered wigs, elaborate silk gowns and glittering jewels, all illuminated by the light of 1,000 candles in crystal chandeliers. The air is thick with perfume and the sound of a string orchestra. In this crowded, noisy and highly public space, private conversation is nearly impossible. Shouting over the music is unseemly, and whispering in someone's ear is far too intimate, and would instantly start gossip. Yet, the game of flirtation, seduction, and intrigue must go on. You need a way to communicate, a silent language that can cut across the crowded room, a method of sending messages that is both subtle and clear, visible to the intended recipient but deniable to everyone else. And you find it in an elegant, deceptively simple object that every lady carries, the handheld fan. You watch a young duchess across the room. She's talking to a portly old duke, but her eyes occasionally flick towards a handsome young cavalry officer. The officer stands, seemingly engrossed in conversation with a friend, but he is watching her too. The duchess holds her folded fan to her lips. The officer subtly nods. A message has just been sent and received. I wish to speak with you. You have just witnessed a single word in the complex and secret language of the fan. This was a highly codified system, with specific gestures corresponding to specific phrases. A lady could carry on an entire conversation with a potential suitor from 50 feet away, all under the guise of simply fanning herself. The grammar of this language was intricate and required memorization by both sender and receiver. It was a skill, like dancing or playing the harpsichord, that was part of a well-bred person's social education. You start to learn the vocabulary. Drawing the fan across your cheek might mean I love you. Twirling it in your left hand could signal we are being watched. Dropping the fan was a dramatic gesture that meant we will be friends, a gentle letdown. If a lady wanted to indicate when to meet, she could touch a specific finger to the edge of her fan, with each finger representing a different hour. Presenting the fan open, with the handle towards the suitor, was a direct invitation. You may speak to me. But if she presented it shut, it was a clear rejection. I do not wish to speak with you. The speed and manner of fanning were also part of the code. Fanning slowly meant, I am married, or I am engaged, a warning to back off. Fanning quickly was a sign of interest and excitement, meaning I am single and available. Hiding your eyes behind the open fan was a flirtatious way of saying, follow me. It was an incredibly sophisticated system of non-verbal communication, turning a simple accessory into a powerful tool for romance and intrigue. A woman's fan was her telegraph, her pager, and her private messaging app all rolled into one beautiful feathered package. The use of fans as a tool of social signalling is a well-documented historical fact of the 17th, 18th and 19th centuries. While some of the more elaborate dictionaries of fan language were likely novelty items published in the later Victorian era, the fundamental principle of using the fan for flirtatious and coded communication was very real. Artisans crafted fans from ivory, mother of pearl and fine silks, often painting them with intricate mythological or romantic scenes. The fan was not just a tool for keeping cool, it was a crucial piece of social equipment, a status symbol, and an instrument of communication. A quirky tidbit that demonstrates the fan's importance is the existence of fan etiquette classes. Young ladies were taught by their governesses or by specialised tutors not just how to dance or curtsy, but how to handle a fan with grace and elegance. There was a correct way to open it. A sharp, crisp snap was considered vulgar, a correct way to hold it, and a correct way to flutter it. The movements had to be fluid, graceful, and seemingly natural, a perfect example of Castiglione's sprezzatura surviving centuries later. An awkwardly handled fan was a sign of poor breeding, like holding your fork incorrectly or laughing with your mouth full. You try to put this new knowledge into practice. You see a lady you admire. You catch her eye and raise your eyebrows slightly. In response, she slowly begins to fan herself. You feel a pang of disappointment. She's telling you she's unavailable. A few minutes later, however, you see her talking to another man. She snaps her fan shut and taps it impatiently on her hand. You watch, fascinated. She's telling him, "I am impatient." He, clearly not versed in the language, continues to drone on. She then presses the fan to her right eye, a clear-cutting message. "When may I be rid of you?" It's a brutal takedown happening in plain sight, and the victim is completely oblivious. The very existence of this secret language has fueled a small but interesting scholarly debate. Historians still argue about how widespread and standardized the language of the fan truly was. Were they universally accepted gestures that everyone in high society knew, like a romantic form of sign language? Or was the code more personal and improvisational, a set of secret signals developed between two specific individuals? Some scholars argue that the published fan dictionaries were more of a marketing gimmick than a reflection of reality, while others maintain that a core vocabulary of gestures was commonly understood in courtly circles. It was likely a combination of both, a few widely known signals supplemented by the private codes of individual lovers. You stand at the edge of the ballroom, the music swelling around you. The world of courtship has become a silent movie. You see a drama of interest, rejection, jealousy, and assignation playing out in a series of elegant, fluttering gestures. It's a world away from the deadly seriousness of the Tudor court or the commercial negotiations of Florence. It is a world of pure theatrical artifice. To find love here, you don't need poetry or a large dowry. You need a quick eye, a steady hand, and a good memory for the vocabulary of the most elegant weapon in the room, the fan. The glittering, decadent ball, with its silent fan conversations and powdered wigs, feels like a dream as you cross the Atlantic. The lavish European courts, with their centuries of tradition and intrigue, are replaced by the stark, raw landscape of colonial America. You've arrived in a New England settlement in the 17th or early 18th century. The air is crisp and smells of pine needles, wood smoke, and the salty sea. Life here is hard, focused on survival, community, and, above all, faith. You're a Puritan, and your approach to life, and especially to love, is as sober and unadorned as your plain black clothing. The very idea of dating as a recreational activity would be horrifying to the community leaders here. The pursuit of a spouse is not a game. It is a serious, practical, and deeply spiritual matter. It is the process of finding a helpmeet, a partner who will assist you in leading a godly life, running a household, and raising pious children. There is no room for the frivolous passions of courtly love or the theatrical flirtations of the Baroque ballroom. Romance is a sober affair, conducted under the watchful eye of God and the entire community. You take an interest in a young woman from a neighbouring family. You admire her piety, her industriousness, and her quiet, steady character. You cannot simply start a conversation with her after the Sunday church service. That would be presumptuously forward. The first step is to approach her father. You must formally ask his permission to begin a courtship with his daughter. This is not just a polite formality. It is a mandatory requirement. To bypass the father's authority would be a grave insult and a sign of a rebellious spirit. The father will likely question you closely. He wants to know about your spiritual state, your prospects for providing for a family. Do you own land? Have you mastered a trade? And your family's reputation. It is, in its own way, as much of a negotiation as the Florentine dowry discussions, but the currency is godliness and economic stability, not florins. If her father grants you permission, the courtship can officially begin. But this does not mean you are free to see her whenever you wish. All of your interactions will be heavily supervised. You will be invited to sit up with her, which means you can spend an evening at her family's home, but always in the main room, with her parents and a swarm of younger siblings present. You will sit on opposite sides of the fireplace, trying to have a meaningful conversation about scripture or the challenges of farming while her little brother listens to every word. Privacy is a luxury that does not exist. The entire family is part of your courtship. Forget trying to steal a kiss. You can barely steal a private sentence. This intense community and parental supervision of courtship is a core historical fact of Puritan life. Marriage was too important to the stability of the community to be left to the whims of young people. The choice of a spouse was a public concern, and the courtship process was designed to be as transparent and controlled as possible to prevent any hint of premarital scandal. Yet, even in this highly restrictive environment, the human need for a little bit of privacy and intimacy found a way. This led to the invention of one of the most wonderfully bizarre pieces of dating technology in history, the courting stick, or courting tube. This was a long, hollow tube, often 6 to 8 feet in length, with a cup-shaped opening at each end. It was essentially a primitive stethoscope for lovers. The young couple could sit on opposite ends of the room, each placing an end of the tube to their ear and mouth respectively. They could then whisper sweet nothings, or perhaps just gossip about the neighbours, directly into each other's ears, their voices carried along the tube. It's a comical image. 2 people in a crowded room connected by a giant wooden straw having a private conversation. But it was a brilliant solution to a real problem. It allowed for the illusion of intimacy and the exchange of confidential words, all while maintaining a perfectly respectable physical distance. The parents could see that nothing untoward was happening, but they couldn't hear what was being said. It was a perfect compromise between the need for supervision and the desire for privacy. It was the Puritan equivalent of texting in the same room. You're being good, but you're still getting your messages across. This ingenious device highlights a fascinating tension in Puritan society, which has long been the subject of historical debate. Historians still argue about the true nature of Puritan views on love and sexuality. The popular stereotype is that they were completely repressed, joyless people who viewed any form of pleasure as sinful. However, a closer look at their letters and diaries reveals a different story. While they condemned premarital relations, they celebrated physical intimacy within marriage as a gift from God, essential for bonding a couple together. The key was the context. The same act could be a sin outside of marriage, but a joyful duty within it. So, was Puritan society fundamentally anti-sex, or was it simply pro-marriage? The evidence suggests the latter. They weren't against passion, they were against passion in the wrong place at the wrong time. As you sit in the warm, firelit room, whispering to your intended through the long, hollow courting stick, you feel the strange paradox of your world. You're bound by 1,000 rigid rules, yet you have found a small, sanctioned space for connection. The conversation isn't about poetry or philosophy. It's about the health of the livestock, the quality of the recent harvest, and your shared hopes for building a life together in this new, hard land. It lacks the glamour of the European courts, but it has a depth and seriousness that feels solid and real. This isn't a game of seduction. It is the slow, careful, and very public process of building a partnership. And for now, this long wooden tube is your most important tool. The sober wooden world of the Puritans, with its courting sticks and whispered pieties, dissolves like a dream upon waking. You're leaving the raw new world behind and returning to England, but it's an England transformed. The grim seriousness of the 17th century has given way to the elegant, rational and ruthlessly social age of the Georgians. You find yourself not in a drafty castle or a humble colonial farmhouse, but in the most fashionable spa town in the country, Bath. The city rises around you like a theatrical set, a symphony of honey-coloured stone and graceful Palladian architecture. This is not a place for survival. It is a place for leisure, for health, and most importantly, for the strategic pursuit of a wealthy spouse. Welcome to the marriage market. The air here doesn't smell of pine and wood smoke. It smells of money, perfume, and a faint, sulphurous tang from the city's famous hot springs. Your day is no longer governed by prayer and farm chores, but by a strict, unwritten social timetable. Everyone who is anyone in society, or anyone who wants to be someone, flocks to Bath for the season. They come on the pretext of taking the waters for their health, but the real reason is to see and be seen, to forge connections, and to participate in the most sophisticated, concentrated matchmaking enterprise the country has ever known. Your morning begins at the Grand Pump Room. It's a vast, elegant hall where people gather to drink the famous thermal water, served warm in glasses. You take a sip. It's famously good for you, but it tastes like it was filtered through a rusty anvil and a hard-boiled egg. But you don't complain. You smile politely and stroll around the room, because drinking the water is not the point. The point is the parade. This is the first social hurdle of the day. Ambitious mothers, known as mamas, promenade their eligible daughters, while eagle-eyed fathers and wealthy bachelors size up the competition. You observe the subtle nods, the calculated greetings. You overhear snippets of conversation, assessing a young lady's dowry or a gentleman's inheritance. He has 3,000 a year and a fine estate in Gloucestershire, one woman whispers behind her fan. After the ordeal of the water, the social carousel continues. You might take a turn about the public gardens or visit one of the circulating libraries, not so much to read, but to see who is there and to be seen by them. A chance encounter near the fiction shelves can lead to a conversation. But every interaction is freighted with meaning. You're constantly being judged on your appearance, your manners, your conversation, and the quality of your shoe buckles. The main event, however, takes place in the evening at the assembly rooms. These are magnificent public ballrooms built specifically for these grand social gatherings. Here, under the light of hundreds of candles, the real business is done. But you can't just walk up to a lady and ask her to dance. That would be an unthinkable breach of decorum. First, you must be formally introduced, and for that, you need the approval of the most powerful man in the city, the Master of Ceremonies. This position, a core historical fact of spa towns like Bath, was essentially that of a social dictator. The most famous was Richard Beau Nash, who reigned as the unofficial King of Bath for much of the early 18th century. He set all the rules. Balls had to start and end at precise times. He dictated the proper dress code. He even banned the wearing of swords in the assembly rooms to prevent hot-headed young men from fighting duels over a lady's honour, a move that drastically civilised public life. To gain entry into Bath's high society, you had to impress Beau Nash. He was the bouncer, the host, and the supreme judge of the 18th century's most exclusive club. A quirky and telling tidbit about Beau Nash's authority is how absolute it was. He was known to publicly humiliate anyone who broke his rules, regardless of their rank. He once famously chided the Duchess of Queensberry for wearing a fine white apron to the ball, which he considered improper for formal attire, and snatched it off her, declaring it fit only for a servant. The fact that a commoner, albeit a very well-dressed one, could enforce his will upon a duchess shows the power of this new meritocracy of manners social structure. With an introduction secured from this formidable figure, you may ask a lady for a dance, but usually for no more than 2 consecutive dances. This prevents any one couple from appearing too familiar and gives everyone a chance to circulate. The dance itself is a test. Can you perform the complex steps of the minuet with grace? Can you make light, witty conversation without stumbling over your feet or your words? All the while, the chaperones and gossips lining the walls are watching, taking notes, and deciding if you are a worthy match for their charge. Your entire future could be determined by how well you execute a chassé. This highly organised public and competitive system of courtship has led to a debate among social historians. Historians still argue whether the Georgian marriage market in places like Bath was a regressive system that objectified women, or if it paradoxically offered them a greater degree of choice. On one hand, women were clearly on display, their value assessed in terms of beauty, accomplishments and dowry, often by manipulative and ambitious parents. Yet on the other hand, this system brought a large number of eligible people together in one place. For a young woman from an isolated country estate, a season in Bath offered an unprecedented opportunity to meet a wide variety of potential husbands, far more than she would ever encounter at home. Did this environment turn them into products for sale, or did it empower them as consumers with a wider selection? As the orchestra strikes up another tune, you look around the glittering ballroom. It is a beautiful, elegant, and utterly ruthless machine for creating advantageous marriages. The pursuit of love has become a public campaign, complete with strategies, intelligence gathering, and public relations. It's a long way from a secret love potion or a whispered word through a courting stick. Here, success is measured in pounds per annum, and your best asset is a flawless sense of style and a good word from the Master of Ceremonies. You've successfully navigated the polished yet cynical marriage market of Georgian Bath. You've mastered the art of the witty retort, the graceful minuet, and the subtle assessment of a potential partner's annual income. It's all been very rational, very ordered, and very much a transaction of the head, not the heart. But as the 18th century gives way to the 19th, a powerful new cultural tide begins to sweep across Europe, one that will drown the cool, calculated logic of the Georgians in a tsunami of pure, unadulterated emotion. The Age of Reason is over. Welcome to the Age of Romanticism. The world no longer looks like a perfectly symmetrical Palladian villa. It looks like a wild, windswept landscape by Caspar David Friedrich, with a lone, brooding figure perched on a rocky cliff, contemplating the sublime and terrifying power of nature. The new heroes are not witty socialites or rational philosophers. They are tormented artists, revolutionary poets, and passionate, misunderstood geniuses. The goal of life is no longer to be polite, but to feel, deeply, intensely, and often tragically. And this new sensibility completely upends the rules of love. You find yourself in a literary salon in London, or a student tavern in Germany, surrounded by young people with fiery eyes and fashionably dishevelled hair. The conversation is not about dowries or property. It's about the soul, about destiny, about the transcendent power of a single, all-consuming passion. A good marriage is no longer one that is financially advantageous. A good marriage is a love match, a union of two souls who are fated to be together. To marry for money is now seen as the ultimate betrayal, a prostitution of the sacred self. This creates a new, and in some ways more difficult, set of criteria for an ideal partner. A large inheritance is now less attractive than a haunted, mysterious past. A cheerful, well-adjusted personality is less desirable than a brooding, melancholic temperament. Your potential beloved should be prone to fits of passion, flights of poetic fancy, and bouts of staring wistfully into the middle distance. A tragic backstory, perhaps a lost love, a family curse, or a secret sorrow, is not a red flag. It's a major selling point. It proves they have the depth of soul required for a truly romantic love. Having a sensitive nature becomes the ultimate status symbol. One of the most dramatic and fashionable expressions of this new emotionalism is swooning. Fainting, once a medical symptom, is now a social performance. For a woman of sensibility, fainting at a moment of high emotion, upon receiving a declaration of love, hearing a particularly moving piece of music, or even reading a sad poem, is the ultimate sign of her refined and delicate nature. It is physical proof that she feels things more deeply than ordinary people. Corsets, which were tightly laced and restricted breathing, certainly helped make fainting a more frequent occurrence, but the swoon was as much a cultural gesture as a physical one. You, as a romantic suitor, are expected to be adept at catching the swooning object of your affection and reviving her with smelling salts, all while looking suitably concerned and intense. The shift towards celebrating passionate, emotional love as the only valid basis for marriage is a well-documented historical fact of the late 18th and early 19th centuries. It was fueled by the explosive popularity of novels like Goethe's The Sorrows of Young Werther, a story about a young artist who falls into a passionate, impossible love and ultimately takes his own life. The book caused a sensation across Europe, leading to a wave of Werther fever, with young men dressing in the same style as the tragic hero. A blue coat and yellow waistcoat, and, in some tragic cases, even imitating his suicide. It was a clear sign that a new ideal of love, one that was intense, personal, and potentially fatal, had captured the popular imagination. A quirky and revealing tidbit from this era is the rise of the graveyard poets. These were writers who found inspiration not in sunny meadows, but in moonlit churchyards, ancient ruins, and crumbling tombstones. They wrote long, gloomy poems meditating on death, decay, and the fleeting nature of life. This Gothic sensibility became incredibly fashionable. A romantic courtship might involve a moonlit stroll through a cemetery, where you and your beloved could contemplate your own mortality and the eternal nature of your souls. It was considered deeply romantic to discuss skulls and epitaphs. A picnic in a ruined abbey was far more chic than one in a manicured park. It was a deliberate rejection of the neat, orderly world of the Georgians in favour of everything that was wild, ancient, and melancholic. This new ideal of passionate, all-consuming love has, of course, been the subject of endless historical analysis. Historians still argue whether the rise of romantic love was a liberating force that freed individuals to follow their hearts, or if it created a new kind of tyranny, the tyranny of impossible expectations. The Romantics idealized love as a perfect, quasi-religious union of souls that could conquer all obstacles. But what happened when that initial fiery passion inevitably cooled into the mundane reality of everyday life? Did this new ideal, with its emphasis on intense and constant feeling, set people up for disappointment and unhappiness by creating a standard that no real relationship could ever meet? You look around the salon at the intense, emotional young people. They are all searching for their one true soulmate, their other half, the person who will complete them and give their life meaning. The pressure is immense. It's no longer about finding a suitable partner to run a household with. It's about finding the key to your own soul. The calculated game of the marriage market has been replaced by a desperate, soul-bearing quest for a perfect, transcendent connection. You must now prove not that you are wealthy or well-mannered, but that you have a sufficiently tortured and passionate soul to be worthy of love. It is, in its own way, just as exhausting and performative as any courtship ritual that came before it. The wild, windswept passion of romanticism, with its swooning heroines and brooding poets, eventually collides with the formidable force of 19th century industrialization and the rise of a powerful, self-conscious middle class. The result is the Victorian era, a period that tries to bottle the lightning of romantic love within the most rigid and suffocatingly complex system of social etiquette imaginable. You find yourself in a respectable London townhouse, all heavy velvet curtains, dark mahogany furniture, and an overwhelming sense of propriety. The air is thick with the scent of coal smoke, beeswax polish, and unspoken rules. Welcome to the labyrinth of Victorian courtship. The ideal is still the love match championed by the Romantics, but the process of achieving it is now governed by a labyrinthine code of conduct designed to prevent any hint of scandal and to ensure that people only fall in love with suitable partners of the correct social class. The freedom of feeling is now trapped in the gilded cage of etiquette. The pursuit of a spouse has become a slow, formal, multi-act play, and you must know your lines perfectly. One flubbed word, one missed cue, and you risk social ruin. Your first encounter with a potential beloved might be at a chaperoned ball or a carefully managed at-home tea party. If you're a gentleman and wish to get to know a young lady better, your first proper move is the morning call. You must visit her family's home, usually between 3 and 4 in the afternoon. You will present your calling card to the servant who answers the door. This small piece of cardboard is your passport. It has your name, and sometimes your London club, engraved on it. The servant will take it to the lady of the house on a silver tray. She will then decide if she is at home to you or not. If she is not, you leave, and your card serves as a record of your visit. If she is, you are admitted. You are shown into the parlour. Your call must last no more than 15 to 20 minutes. It is a brief formal interview. You will make polite small talk about the weather, a recent concert, or a sermon you admired. The young lady you're interested in will be present, but so will her mother, and possibly an aunt or a younger sister. All conversation is public and G-rated. There is absolutely no privacy. You're being assessed for your manners, your conversation, and your general respectability. After your allotted time, you take your leave. You cannot visit too frequently, lest you appear overly eager and alarm the family. The morning call is a delicate dance of showing interest without showing too much interest. If your calls are well received, you might be invited to escort the young lady and her chaperone on a walk in the park or to a public exhibition. The chaperone is a non-negotiable part of the equation. A respectable, unmarried young woman could not be alone with a man who was not a close relative. Ever. The chaperone, usually her mother, an older married sister, or a hired companion, is a human buffer zone, there to ensure that no impropriety, not even a confidential conversation, can take place. It's like having a personal security guard on every single one of your dates. The overwhelming emphasis on chaperonage and the prevention of any private interaction between young men and women is a core historical fact of middle and upper-class Victorian society. An unmarried woman's reputation was her most valuable asset, and it was considered incredibly fragile. To be seen alone with a man could compromise her, leading to gossip that could destroy her marriage prospects. The system was designed to protect that reputation at all costs, even at the cost of any genuine, unscripted connection. A quirky and almost comical illustration of this obsession with propriety is the etiquette surrounding staircases. Etiquette manuals of the day offered specific instructions for how a lady and gentleman should navigate a flight of stairs together. When going up, the lady should go first. This was so the gentleman, following behind, would not be able to catch a glimpse of her ankles, which were considered scandalously erotic. When going down, however, the gentleman should go first. This was so that if the lady should trip and fall, he would be in a position to catch her, rather than her tumbling into him. It is a microscopic level of social choreography, designed to prevent even the possibility of an accidental and potentially titillating physical interaction. If you successfully navigate this minefield of calling cards, chaperoned walks, and staircase etiquette, you may finally reach the point where you can declare your intentions. But you do not do this to the young lady herself. You must once again formally ask her father for his permission to propose. It is a return to the Puritan model, filtered through a new lens of bourgeois respectability. If the father approves of your financial and social standing, you will be granted a rare, supervised private interview with the young lady, where you can finally make your proposal. It is very likely the first time you have ever been in a room alone with her. You can just imagine the awkward pressure of that moment. This suffocatingly restrictive system has been the subject of endless historical debate. Historians still argue whether Victorian courtship etiquette was primarily a tool for controlling female sexuality and enforcing patriarchal authority, or if it was a system that, in its own way, empowered women. Did the rules simply trap women in a state of infantilized helplessness, or did the clear established framework give women a degree of control? By mastering the rules of etiquette, a woman could accept or reject a suitor's advances through subtle cues. The way she accepted his card, the warmth of her greeting, without ever having to be direct. Did the system protect them, or did it imprison them in a fortress of politeness? You sit in the parlour, your teacup balanced on your knee, making painfully dull conversation with your beloved's mother. Your beloved sits across the room, her hands folded demurely in her lap. You want to ask her what book she truly loves, what her secret dreams are, if she finds this whole process as agonizingly slow as you do. But you can't. You must talk about the weather. The path to love is now a long, formal, and excruciatingly well-mannered hallway, lined with chaperones, and you must walk it, one perfectly polite step at a time. You're trapped in the velvet-lined prison of the Victorian parlour. The air is thick with unspoken thoughts and the ticking of a mantel clock, marking the slow, agonizing minutes of your chaperoned visit. Direct communication is impossible. A declaration of love is a distant, terrifying final step. You need a way to convey your feelings, to test the waters, to ask the questions you're not allowed to speak aloud. And just like the courtiers of the Baroque era with their fans, the Victorians developed a silent secret language to bypass their own restrictive rules. But this time the medium isn't an accessory. It's something natural, beautiful, and deceptively complex. Flowers. You decide to send a bouquet to the young lady you're courting, but you can't just pick a random assortment of pretty blossoms. That would be like sending a message full of gibberish. In the age of florography, the language of flowers, every single bloom has a specific, widely understood meaning. Your bouquet is a coded letter, and one wrong flower could turn a declaration of love into a declaration of war. You visit a florist, but you feel more like you're visiting a cryptographer. You need to assemble your message carefully. You start with red roses, the most famous and straightforward symbol. They mean, I love you. But that's too bold, too direct for a first move. You need something more subtle. Perhaps you will choose a primrose, which means I can't live without you, or a red tulip, which is a formal declaration of love. But what if you want to ask a question? You could include a sprig of ivy geranium, which asks, may I have the next dance? Or a marigold, which conveys the anxious question, what is the cause of your sorrow? Or, are you feeling jealous? The bouquet becomes a dialogue. You're sending a message, hoping for a floral reply. The real genius and danger of florography lies in its nuance. The way a flower was presented changed its meaning. A flower handed over upright meant the sentiment was positive. Handed over upside down, it meant the opposite. A rosebud with its thorns and leaves still attached meant, I fear, but I hope. A rosebud with the thorns removed meant, there is nothing to fear. If a lady returned a flower to you with her right hand, it meant yes. If she used her left, it meant no. This complex language was popularized by dozens of flower dictionaries published throughout the 19th century, which listed flowers alphabetically alongside their symbolic meanings. This is a well-established historical fact. These books became essential guides for anyone navigating the social world. People would consult them with the same seriousness as they would a dictionary or a Bible. It was a hugely popular craze that permeated every level of society that could afford fresh flowers. You spend an hour agonising over your choices. You want to convey passionate love, red carnation, but also hint at your pure intentions, white lily, and your faithfulness, violet. But you must be careful. A yellow carnation means disdain or rejection. A sprig of basil means hatred. And foxglove, while beautiful, means insincerity. You can just imagine the disaster. You intend to send a message of pure adoration, but you accidentally include a flower that says, "I love you, but I hate you, and I'm totally lying about it." Your courtship would be over before it even began. It's like trying to write a love letter with a dictionary where half the words are booby-trapped. A particularly quirky tidbit that illustrates the insane complexity of florography is the tussie-mussy. This was a small circular bouquet, a nosegay, that was arranged in a concentric pattern. Each ring of flowers represented a different thought or feeling. The central flower was the most important, the main theme of the message. The surrounding rings of flowers would then modify or add to that central meaning. A lady might carry one to a ball, and a gentleman versed in the language could read her bouquet to gauge her mood or her feelings towards him. It was a wearable, fragrant status update. After much deliberation, you finalise your bouquet. You choose a red camellia, you're a flame in my heart, surrounded by myrtle, love in absence, and tied with a ribbon. The knot in the ribbon itself is a message, a symbol of being bound together. You send it off with a messenger, and then you wait. The next day, you receive a small package. Inside is a single flower from the lady. It is a sprig of sweet pea. You rush to your flower dictionary. Your heart pounds. Sweet pea. Thank you for a lovely time. It's not a declaration of love, but it's not a rejection either. It is a gentle encouragement. The game is afoot. The very existence of this floral code has sparked a lively debate among cultural historians. Historians still argue about how seriously the language of flowers was taken by the average Victorian. Was it a genuine, widely used form of communication, a vital tool for expressing forbidden emotions? Or was it more of a charming parlour game, a fad, a way for publishers to sell pretty books to middle-class women? Was a young man really terrified of choosing the wrong flower? Or was it all just a bit of sentimental fun? The sheer number of dictionaries and the frequent references in literature and letters of the period suggest that, for many, it was taken very seriously indeed. It was a product of its time, a culture that valued sentiment and symbolism, but demanded that it be expressed within the strictest of boundaries. You look at the single sweet pea, a delicate, fragrant symbol of hope. This silent, coded conversation is your only lifeline in the stifling formality of the Victorian world. It is a way to speak of the heart in a society that is terrified of honest emotion. The courtship continues, one carefully chosen blossom at a time, a secret garden of meaning blooming in the midst of a social wasteland. The silent, fragrant conversation of flowers is agonizingly slow. You sent your bouquet. You received a single sweet pea in reply. Thank you for a lovely time. It's a whisper of encouragement. But what now? Send another bouquet? A single blossom? Wait for her to drop a daisy as she passes? The subtlety is exhausting. The whole process is so indirect, so wrapped in layers of symbolism, that you crave something, anything, that is straightforward. You want to shed the codes and the chaperones and the stifling propriety and just put it out there. And as you sit at your breakfast table one morning, rustling through the daily newspaper, you find it. Tucked away in the back pages, past the shipping news and advertisements for patent medicines, is a small column that represents a radical, shocking and wonderfully direct new approach to finding love. It's the matrimonial column, the personal ad, the lonely hearts. Here, in black and white, for all the world to see, people are advertising for a spouse with the same frankness they might use to sell a used carriage. You lean in closer, your toast forgotten, and begin to read. There is no poetry here. There is no talk of flames in the heart or souls destined to entwine. This is the language of pragmatism, a stark and sometimes brutal honesty that is both shocking and refreshing. A typical ad might read, "A bachelor, 38, of good character and possessing a secure income of £400 per annum, wishes to meet a respectable lady of domestic habits, not above the age of 30. Good teeth and an amiable disposition are essential. A small fortune is desirable, but not an absolute necessity. Another one catches your eye. A widow, 45, with a well-established bakery business and no encumbrances, meaning no children, desires to correspond with a sober and industrious widower, with a view to mutual comfort and partnership in life. No triflers, please. You can't help but let out a small, amazed laugh. The bluntness is breathtaking. Forget flowery compliments. Here, a partner's value is distilled into age, income, and the structural integrity of their teeth. The mention of passable looks is a recurring theme, a phrase that feels like the 19th century equivalent of swiping left on yourself, while still trying to sound appealing. It's a world away from the idealised beauty of courtly love. Here, people are just hoping for not actively repulsive. It's a dating strategy based on managed expectations. The appearance of these personal ads in newspapers, a mainstream historical fact, dates back much further than most people realise. While they blossomed in the Victorian era with rising literacy and urbanisation, the very first known matrimonial ad in England appeared in a publication by John Houghton called A Collection for Improvement of Husbandry and Trade way back in July of 1695. It was placed by a gentleman of about 30 years of age, who, he claimed, would be very well pleased to be yoked with a woman of about the same age. The very idea of using a public journal to solicit a spouse, a yoke fellow, was born. But as you scan the column in your Victorian paper, you notice the dangers lurking between the lines. Mixed in with the genuine, if clumsy, attempts at connection are ads that hint at a darker side. This leads to a quirky and dangerous tidbit of the era, the matrimonial ad scam. Con artists, both male and female, used these columns as their personal hunting ground. A man might post an ad claiming to be a wealthy gentleman or a decorated army officer, luring in lonely spinsters or widows. After a brief correspondence, he would invent a sudden financial emergency and ask his new beloved for a loan, promising to pay it back as soon as they were married. Once the money was sent, he would disappear forever. It was a cruel but effective way to prey on the lonely, and the newspapers were full of cautionary tales. You see an ad that feels suspicious. Young, handsome officer, soon to inherit a vast fortune, temporarily embarrassed for funds, seeks a lady of means for immediate marriage. It's the 19th century version of the Nigerian prince email printed on cheap newsprint. It's a reminder that with this new, direct method of seeking love comes a new, direct method of being swindled. This new phenomenon, this public marketplace of the heart, has long been a topic of discussion for social historians. Historians still argue whether these personal ads were a genuine sign of social liberation, offering new choices to isolated individuals, or if they were largely seen as a refuge for the desperate and socially inept. For a woman in a small village with no eligible men, or a man too shy to navigate the complex rituals of the ballroom, did the personal ad offer a revolutionary new path to happiness? Or was admitting you had to resort to advertising for a spouse a profound social failure, a last-ditch effort for those who couldn't succeed in the normal marriage market? The ads themselves, with their frequent disclaimers of no triflers and all correspondence in strictest confidence, suggest a deep anxiety about the very act of placing the ad. You lean back in your chair, the newspaper spread before you. You have travelled through centuries of dating advice. You've seen love approached as a game of seduction in Rome, a spiritual danger by the church, a matter of chivalric duty, a business negotiation, and a performance of emotional intensity. You have learned silent languages of fans and flowers, and now here it is, stripped of all its mystery and romance, laid bare in the classifieds. It's the logical, if unromantic, conclusion of a world that is becoming more anonymous, more urban, and more commercial. The ad you're reading for a thrifty and cheerful woman feels like the final death knell of courtly love. It's not elegant, it's not subtle, but for the first time in this long journey, it feels something akin to modern.